Little bit behind on the agenda. First time ever that that's happened. Today. Yeah, first time today that that's happened. We are to the point in our agenda committee to take up peace officer training and consideration of a bill draft that we looked at in the second meeting, but we also have some things first that we want to get to. There are some folks who have come by to share with us some information on some bills that for the consideration of our committee, not as committee bills, but just so that we are aware of what's up. So, Mr. Co-Chairman, do you want to do any introductions here or whatever?
Chief Thompson, do you want to bring your delegation up and just? We are running behind, so I do ask you to be brief.
Yeah, it's always good to have some east side folks, with us. Yeah. Yeah, I think just there it is. Eventually you'll get it. Yeah, pull that nice and close, Chief. There you go.
You ready? Mr. Chairman, I have with me Stacy Nelson, who's the director of the Child Advocacy Project here in Casper, Wyoming, and Jewel Parrish, who is our state coordinator and also on the national level. One of the things that we're looking to bring to this committee and the legislature, so I wear multiple hats. This isn't just from the chief's standpoint of Evansville, but I am the chairman of the DFS Oversight Council for the state of Wyoming, and I also sit on the board for the Child Advocacy Project. So in brief, a while back, I had Director Nelson give a presentation to the DFS Oversight Council, to which Senator Schuler is a part of. And we had a discussion about codifying accommodations for children testifying in court to where there's some protections in a sense towards either the victims, and beyond just that, it also can be worked for civil cases. Because we don't have that, and there's several states have codified that in, to kind of put in perspective, just through the Child Advocacy Project in the state, there's about 500 kids a year that get forensically interviewed in the state of Wyoming. And that's just what they know of. In law enforcement, some agencies interview their own children. And so we have quite a few, these kids that potentially can end up in court testifying. And in codifying, because as it is in the court system right now, it's up to the judges whether they allow, or how they allow these kids to testify. And parents, they've talked about, they're scared about the kids testifying. There's concerns about the trauma that having to testify, what happens to them in court can create more problems for these kids. And so the short version is something that we're going to work on and bring to you guys and potentially look for a sponsor. But we wanted to plant the seed that we want to bring that in this upcoming legislation. And with that, I'll stand for question since you're on the clock.
Chief, thank you. Appreciate you being here, all three of you. And thanks for the work you do on this front. I'm really proud of that effort. Can't speak for everyone on the committee, but yeah, questions. Senator Schuler, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Chief, I was just wondering, have you looked at other states and what they do? And I'm wondering if they have some kind of a draft bill or a model type bill that we could take a look at for potential legislation.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Schuler, we are working on that. There are other states that have that, and they are working on finding that, and then we're going to put together a draft to bring forward.
Thank you.
Okay. And this being the third meeting that we'll have in the interim, we're running short on time for the interim, but we wanted to make sure the committee was aware that this piece of legislation hopefully will be coming. I think it's something that many of us, if not all of us, are very interested in. So
if any member of the committee might be interested in being a sponsor for this bill, it'd be somebody very, so that's what we were hoping for, right? Very
correct.
Good.
Thank you.
yeah, well, thanks the three of you. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being here. Please reach out. And as I can speak for the chairman, the two of us will certainly try to point in the right direction and get some help too for you guys, so, all right. Thank
Mr.
you
Chairman,
very
thank you.
much. Okay, Mr. Co-Chairman. Here,
So our clerk of district court
pretty good timing right there, because we're ready.
was wanting
As soon as she gets her coat off, that,
perfect timing.
we have another informational opportunity. Yeah, please come forward.
Are you all alone or do you have backup this morning? Okay.
And we will say what we said to the earlier group, which is we're tight on the agenda, and so we're glad to just grant a little bit of time here as a heads up to the committee. Jill, it's good to see you. Please introduce yourself. Yeah.
That's great. I'm Jill Keister, Clerk of District Court for the 7th Judicial District here in Natrona County.
I'm Janet Montgomery, and I'm the Clerk of District Court in the 9th Judicial District for Sublette County.
So this bill is for 7-4-207, and this would be language to make this statute work. It's an old statute, and it right now, the coroner, if he gets property from a decedent and he does not have the next of kin, or the next of kin does not claim the property, the statute says the property shall go to the clerk of district court, and it doesn't allow for anything else to happen with that property. So,
So you're getting too much property?
well, yeah, kind of. And we are the record keeper for the court, and we don't want to be in the business of trying to get rid of the property. So, and it's happening more and more. So the proposed language we have is been drafted by one of our county attorneys here. The Coroners Association is behind this, the Clerk of District Courts Association is behind this, and the County Attorneys Association has reviewed the language. This would just allow the clerks to be taken out of the process and would allow the coroners to sell the property, and then it would help offset property or burial expenses the county incurs on those type of burials. So that's really it in a nutshell, unless I'm missing something.
So,
Oh, and I would just say this if I could. Well, I have gotten some property, one of our courts has gotten a truck, and the coroner and everybody deemed that it was property on the decedent because the person died in the truck, and it wasn't a great truck. So now they have the truck in the courthouse parking lot, and there's no way in the statute for anything to happen with the property. So everybody thinks it's a good way to get the funds back into the county if that's the case with that type of situation. So, thank you.
questions from the committee? Senator Case?
What was the statute reference that you're trying to change again?
Chairman, Representative, it is 7-4-207.
207. Thank you. Might help you with it.
So, and
And I
my,
do have the draft language, if anybody.
thank you. You do have the draft language?
Yes.
That,
Maybe we get a look at that. I mean, I personally, I'd like to look at it.
I would ask, Jill, if you'd be willing to, would you, can you get information on that bill to Mr. Fuller in the LSO office? Okay, we've got that part taken care of. And then, Mr. Fuller, if you wouldn't mind, one of you three, if you'd send it to the committee so that everybody is aware of what the clerk's up to. And I'm understanding that my home county of Sublette is on board with this. We're good, Ms. Montgomery? Good, all right. Yeah, it's sounding pretty kumbaya. I think, thanks for making the trip over, and appreciate you guys giving us a heads up on that. Committee, that's really all that was on these two efforts, to just let you know that they're working on some bills. So, anything else, Jill? Thank you,
No, thank you for this opportunity.
appreciate it. Yeah, we're tight on time, so we're gonna keep moving, okay?
Perfect. Thank you.
committee, I understand that somebody's come a long way to talk to us, and I'm going to do something I don't ever do, and that is provide a short amount of time because we don't have any time. Sir, I understand you've come a long way and need to talk to the committee. And I'm speaking to you, sir. Yeah, I'm going to, with caution, I'm going to grant you a little bit of time here because I understand you've come a long, long way to visit with our committee. And we've got lots of work to do on several topics this afternoon. I didn't want you to have to wait till 4 or 5 o'clock, so. Okay, if you would please keep it to, 5 or 10 minutes, we would really appreciate it because we're behind.
If you have handouts, give them to the staff over there.
Yeah. But please come to the microphone and let us know what's up, and am I going to regret this?
You might regret this.
Sir, I don't want to regret carving out time of an agenda here, so if you'd come forward, and I'll grant you a little time to let us know what you're wanting to visit with us about. Please sit down and use the microphone. And like I said, we don't have a lot of time for things that are not on the agenda, so please give us about the 30,000-foot view, 5 minutes, okay?
I'll do my best. My name is Mitterek or Robert Lee. I'm originally from Ohio. What I need to speak up and out about starts when I'm 2 years of age, how I get diagnosed with a disability, how my parents started making issues for me with family and many others. They've been going on for over 6 decades. I've been here in in Wyoming for 9 years, tried to get some help support. Could I been diagnosed with a disability or a special needs human? People not wanting to be of help for someone. How I come from, like I said, Ohio. I'm in Wyoming. How I try to speak about human trafficking, try to speak about felony charges, try to speak up about a number of other little issues. I have had 2 cases, one in federal court, another one in circuit court, has made it to district court because I filed an appeal. How I'm seeing a number of things more or less headed toward the Supreme Court, and I got to deal with the Wyoming Supreme Court first before I can take it to the United States Supreme Court. So I tried to speak up about, why can't you start working with me? Because if you make it to the United States Supreme Court, if they elect to hear my case with impossible, no, not, how I can speak about national importance, how I can speak about selective hearing, turning a blind eye to a super important case, not wait to help somebody start the healing process. I'm wondering what the judiciary system could do to try and nip the bud and get some people inside, hey, you need to start working with Mr. Rick instead of keep making more issues for yourself, but also him, and how if he's able to get out to the United States Supreme Court, and if his case make it to how he could make more issues for those, and not just I, but also the state, since Zion is the largest populated city in Wyoming. Nobody want to advocate for Midrash. Could maybe the judiciary system or committee could do some advocating in a way. Is that possible? I don't know yet. I just want to put it down there because if I don't speak up about something, it's on me. But if I do, I could start making some unnecessary issues for some other people that don't want to work with a special needs human that have been here for the last 9 years. And I'm open to any questions the committee has.
Sir, thank you for taking the time. I worry about being able to plug in anywhere along the way of what you've described. And I think we're all doing the best we can to follow, what you've shared with us this morning or this afternoon. But it's kind of hard for us to jump in at any point in there. So what I would offer is if you could make sure that we have the information from you and get it to our staff members over here, then I will personally follow up and see if we can't find out what your situation is and where we might be able to go in terms of advocating on your behalf. Does that make sense?
That would be great.
And I'm sorry that that's really about all this group can do. This legislative committee is just not set up today to be able to spend any more time on that, but we can certainly get your information and follow up with you, okay?
Sounds good.
Okay. Committee, any other questions for this gentleman? Okay. Well, thank you very much. We're glad to give you a few minutes, and sorry we don't have any more time than that, but please get your information to our staff and
A
we'll be
little
in touch.
time is better than no time.
Okay, all righty. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, all righty. Okay, committee, let's get started with our peace officer training consideration. We've got LSO 281, draft .4, peace officer training deadline requirement. Oh, Senator, Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As it relates to the bill that you just announced, we're going to take up 25 LSO 281. I make a motion to table the bill.
That takes precedence, committee, and so 281, peace officer training deadline requirement will be tabled.
No, it's got to be a vote. Got to be a vote.
Do we have to vote that?
No debate, but there'll be a vote.
Okay.
Point of order.
Senator Case.
I'm not sure you can table something that hasn't had a motion on it. It's not actually in our. It's not before us. It's not before, I mean, it's like.
I honestly have not run into this. I've chaired a few committees, and I just have not run into this.
Yeah, and
Do
the other
we
thing
need
is that we would have members of the public, this is out of order, but if there are members of the public that wanted to address this bill, they should be allowed to, even if we don't take any action.
I would certainly do that, Senator, thank you for that, but people have made their way here. Many perhaps want to weigh in on this issue. We could certainly take up that motion once we get to the bill. I'm wondering if we don't need to. I tell you what, let's hold that motion for a bit, if it's all right with the bringer of the motion, and we'll listen in on whatever testimony people want to provide. Because I think people have come from a ways to do that. So let's take enough time to walk through the bill real quickly. Mr. Fuller will listen to public testimony, and then we will revisit the motion.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, 25 LSO 281 0.4, this is 4-01 in online meeting materials. After discussion in September, the committee requested a bill draft that would remove the one-year grace period for peace officers appointed on a permanent basis to complete the basic training program. And all the bill does to do that is page 2, lines 2 and 3, it strikes that language in terms of for more than 1 year unless within 1 year from the date of appointment. So the way it would read with the changes is that no person can be appointed as a peace officer on a permanent basis without first completing basic training. The staff comment on page 2 just notes that the committee may wish to consider addressing part-time peace officers who currently have 2 years from the date of appointment to complete basic training. And then the next part of the staff comment, page 2, line 34, is just whether there should be some specifying of applicability in terms of those peace officers who may have already been appointed, but are still within that 1 year time. With that, Mr. Chairman, happy to answer questions.
Okay, any questions of Mr. Fuller regarding what this bill is all about? Any questions? Okay, let's go to anyone who would like to testify on 281. Does anyone want to come forward? Thank you. Please introduce yourself and tell us about peace officer training deadline requirement.
Good afternoon, committee. I am Chuck Bain, Director of the Wyoming Law Enforcement Academy. The official position of the academy and my role as the director is really have no opinion related to the bill. That would not be appropriate for me. However, I stand here to answer any questions that you might have related to the perceived impact that this bill might have on the academy operation.
Representative Rodriguez-Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, so it's my understanding that it takes quite a bit of time. We heard testimony last meeting until an officer, from the point they're hired initially, until they can get into basic, right? So if this bill, say for example, were to pass, is there any plan from the academy to increase the wait time for agencies across our state so that the turnaround is quicker, or any plan to increase the number of classes or basic training classes that are offered throughout the year?
That would be certainly one of the options that we would have to look at. Right now, we provide 3 peace officer basic classes per year. Each of those are 14. In 2025, those will become 14 weeks. So if you do the math, that's what, 46 weeks out of the year to try and insert yet another basic into that training calendar. Not impossible, but it's a challenge for us. The other thing that the Wyoming Law Enforcement Academy faces that other states tend to not do is we also train detention officers. Many of my counterparts around the region only train peace officers, and detention officers are trained through another entity. So that's a 7-week program that we also have to incorporate and plan with the training calendar. So as it stands right now, our initial look at this and the potential for more classes would mean that we'd have to have an increase related to resources, more staff, more instructors. I'm not sure what the facility capacity would do. It all has to do with the numbers and the need of those agencies, and we would be looking to them to see, what's the solve? Do we use bigger classes and allow more people in? That has a problem related to training quality things, or do we try to then offer more classes and fit those in? Because right now, again, we do 3 years, so that's one about every 4 months thing. Now, we aren't per se training or turning people away. I just have some information that I'll share with you that if we have applications, just because we have applications doesn't turn and translate to it's a student attending the academy. For instance, in 2024, For our A Basic, the very first one of the year, we had 76 applications for that Peace Officer Basic. We took 4 of those and pushed those off to the second Basic, and we ended up training 37. Our cap right now is 40 students per basic that we believe is the max that we should be training at any given time, again, for that quality control issue. When we came to the second one for that year, we had 59 applications. When it's all said and done, and the very first day that basic turned up, 31 people showed up, right? So there's some attrition that I want to reserve some slots. I have this need, but people don't get hired. So we have a little bit of buffer right now that's taking place that we're not max at each and every basic training that's taking place in the year. The challenge will be is trying to meet the needs of the agency of filling that position when those come available. And I can foresee that somewhere in the future that we may not be able to answer those needs, or there wouldn't be sufficient vacancies, if you would, for an agency that wants to get an individual through basic training. Currently, right now, for the A Basic for 2025, I'm sitting at 53, 20 applications that has a name attached to that application, and 23 reserve slots that have been requested by 21 different agencies to fill those slots. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out and how many agencies get people hired by that deadline. But that just gives you a representative, an idea of what are the numbers that we're looking at and what our history has been.
Representative, go ahead, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So yes, follow up. So it's come to my attention that there are times when a newly hired officer has fully completed their FTO program with the agency that's hired them prior to getting into the Law Enforcement Academy basic training, which is known as basic training. Can you tell me how often that happens, or that you're aware of that happening when you receive a recruit?
Go ahead, Director.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Rodriguez, well, it would be a swag on my point. I would venture to say, if you allow me to answer that with just that, of my experience, that 50 to 60% of the students that come through basic have been through some type of FTO program prior to the academy.
Okay. Are we good, Representative? Let's go to the co-chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair and Director. So there's nothing in this bill that changes the number of people who need to go through Peace Officer Basic. Would you agree with that?
That's true.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions of the Director? Anything further? Director, thank you. Appreciate it. Appreciate you coming. Wanted to give you a chance to visit with us. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Walsh. How are you?
I'm doing well, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I'm Chris Walsh. I'm the Executive Director of the Peace Officer Standard and Training Commission. And I appreciate that oftentimes people don't understand some of what these things mean when we talk about certification. So I'll just tell you how the certification of peace officers works in Wyoming. When an officer is initially hired by an agency, they will submit their paperwork to my office. We will issue a temporary certification on peace officers. That's good for 1 year. Within that 1 year, they have to get through basic training. After that basic training graduation, then they're issued what's called a basic peace officer certification. That's good for up to 2 years, and now we're getting into an area where it's time and service and it's number of training, advanced training hours where they progress. If they get 80 hours within the first year, we'll advance them after 1 year of time and service to the advanced level. And now we get into another criteria where at their advanced level, it depends on higher education, so college degrees, and time and service again. So the basic on that would be if, let's say you've got a high school diploma, you're at an advanced level, you're gonna spend 3 more years time and service before you're eligible to move to professional. You'll have to get 80 hours more advanced training as you go. And then once at the professional level, that individual will have to go to 40 hours of training each and every year throughout the rest of their career. And that just kind of gives you an idea of how the certifications work and are maintained in the state of Wyoming. And I'd be happy to entertain any questions that you've got.
Questions for the director? Let's go first to Rodriguez Williams, then we'll come back to the co-chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Walsh. So I have two questions for you. One is just, do you plan on sticking around for the next topic in person? And then second, what is your opinion, serving as the director of the Field Training Officer Program statewide? And do you feel the need, or do you see the need to streamline it a little more statewide when it comes to agencies? And how would that interplay with this bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Co-Chairman, Representative Rodriguez Williams. I will be here for the next topic that we're going to speak about, and then my opinion on the FTO program. So just so everybody's familiar with that, that would be Field Training Officer after, not necessarily after basic training, but an officer goes through a field training program where they're side by side with a seasoned officer that's been trained in that area, the field training area. And that program is not consistent across the state. There's not a statewide mandate on what that looks like. I can tell you that, my background in law enforcement is with the Casper Police Department, where I ultimately retired from there. We had what I would consider a standard program. It was at least 3 months long. Actually, it's been extended since that time with daily evaluations and training topics for each day. But that is not the case statewide, and it depends on an agency's resources, and it depends on the staffing levels of an agency. So they can vary from 4 months to 2 weeks.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Director, I appreciate you being here today. So when an officer has a temporary certificate before they've gone through the academy, they have full peace officer powers during that time period, as I understand. So can you describe for us how this plays out in communities that hire officers, get them a temporary certificate, and then it's several months before they attend the academy? What are those officers doing in those communities during that multi-month period or multi-week period?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, well, obviously I haven't spent time at each of the agencies. I can tell you in general that when an officer receives a temporary peace officer certification, they have full peace officer authority, just as a professional peace officer would. And they can go to work and they can exercise police powers prior to having basic training. I know that some agencies have a very strict training program prior to, if an officer is going to get out on the street before they go to basic training. Others, the program is not as strict. And in theory, you could have someone that's sworn in as a peace officer with no training, virtually put out on their own to do their best with what they think they should do.
Follow up, go ahead.
So they're carrying firearms, they're making arrests, they're executing searches, they're involved in all aspects of constitutional law and the criminal justice system during that timeframe before they go and receive formal training. And I believe your testimony was in some of these departments, the amount of training that they get may be next to nothing.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, that's correct. They do have that ability. I can't give you a number of agencies across the state and on how they do things. I have personal experience in cases where officers have been hired, provided approximately 2 weeks of training with a senior officer, not necessarily an FTO, and then been tasked with facing the decisions and choices that a veteran officer would have to make after being equipped with training.
Let's go to Senator Cooper and then come back to Representative Rodriguez Williams. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, could you do you have any thoughts on what kind of effect this bill would have on the very small departments across the state, 2-3-man departments, if they have to wait 4 to 8 months before they can, from the time they have hire a person before they can put him in the field?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Cooper, I do have some thoughts and I have some input that has been provided to me by other agencies. And I've been told that it would be very difficult for them. What they've told me is it would be difficult for them to hire people because when they see an opportunity where they've got a good candidate, they want to grab that candidate before maybe they go somewhere else. Not necessarily a different law enforcement job, but maybe in the mineral industry or something like that where it's a little bit better paycheck. So I've been told it would be very detrimental in filling the ranks and hiring officers. I know that probably even a better person to speak on that would be Director Thompson. I think he's got better information on it, but I have heard that it would be a problem.
Any follow-up, Senator? Good. Let's go to Representative Rodriguez-Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Director Walsh, I too have concerns about recruitment and the difficulty that these agencies have, and especially staff issues, having really low staff, especially in the rural areas. Just to piggyback on the question of the good co-chairman, he asked about new recruits that have the 1-year permit or certification, 1-year certification to be on the street. Do you know how many agencies require that newly hired officer to be partnered with a seasoned officer or an FTO? Or perhaps maybe that's a question for Westcott.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Rodriguez-Williams, I can't give you a number. What's required to be reported to me is obviously when a person's been hired and I give them the certification, and then we catalog their ongoing training. Field training programs, unless they're very scripted, are not post-certified. There's only a couple in the state that are, and I don't know the background of a lot of the recruits that come to the academy.
Very good.
Quick follow-up.
Oh,
Thank you, Mr.
absolutely.
Chairman. Director
Follow-up.
Walsh,
Go ahead, Representative.
why is it that only some FTO programs are certified by post and others are not?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Rodriguez-Williams, the agencies that want their FTO program certified by post have to submit a very comprehensive outline, and then they have to follow that outline as they go through. So typically you'll see at least a 3-phase structured field training officer program. And the agency will have to adhere to that script just like you would a college class syllabus or something along those lines. And most agencies have opted not to do that, not to provide that. I can tell you that right now only the Cheyenne Police Department and the Wyoming Game and Fish have post-certified FTO programs.
Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, when you're looking at disciplinary concerns, because you also handle the decertification issue, do you know how many officers or general are maybe categorized as these people who are early officers that haven't spent a lot of time in the field or fit within what would be covered by this, where they're in that first year?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza, I can tell you that in the last 5 years, off the top of my head, one individual fits this category perfectly, did not attend basic training, ultimately ended up being decertified, very likely over lack of training, and that was a factor in it. As far as decertification matters go, the average years of service for an individual to be decertified in the state is 7 years.
Anything further for the director? Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I reached out to a couple of agencies in my area. They don't seem to be a fan of this. And again, it's some of the issues that everyone else has mentioned. Some of the smaller agencies, one of them did say that they do shadow with another officer during those first 3 months, which I thought that was refreshing to hear that. But it sounds to me like it's not really so much this bill that can help us, but maybe what we can do with our law enforcement academy to try and get more staff and maybe more sessions there so that we can get folks out a little quicker Because what I've heard from a couple of these folks is that it's tough to hire now anyway. It's hard to get people that can pass a physical test. And then they put this time and money into them, and then some of them don't even make it to the academy while they're waiting to get in because they've decided, nah, this isn't for me. And it is hard to recruit. I mean, we know that in just about every agency. So do you see this as being the panacea, or do you think maybe we need to focus more on what's happening at the Law Enforcement Academy?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Schuler, I do not believe this is the end-all be-all to correct all the problems. I absolutely believe that you've touched on some important topics, and that includes providing Director Bain staff and resources that he needs in order to meet the requirements of everybody in the state. I also believe that this is not solely an academy problem. It would also be an agency, a change in practice, a change in when they post their listings, when they, to line up when we hire with when the next academy class would go. So it would be a collaborative effort, but certainly the state can offer a lot of help to the Law Enforcement Academy.
Thank you.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in your law enforcement background, Director, would you rather have a shift unstaffed or a shift staffed by an officer that was poorly trained or untrained?
Ooh.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, I feel I have been soundly thrown under the bus.
Yeah, that's a hot potato.
Well, no, I'll answer it. I would rather have a shift unstaffed than have an untrained officer on the road by themselves.
Anything else for the director? Director Walsh, appreciate you. Thanks for being here on this one, and hopefully you can stick around. We've got another one for you later, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll stay.
Anyone else want to come forward? Mr. Thompson.
Hi, Mr. Chairman. I'm Alan Thompson, Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police. The draft bill that we're discussing today led to some very robust discussions from our membership across the state. As it hit, I did some research on our surrounding states in the Mountain West, find that Montana, South Dakota, North Dakota, and Idaho, similar rural areas, offer a one-year certification requirement, very similar to Wyoming. And Nebraska has some tighter controls on that. There's an additional 80-hour course that they must do, and they have to be married at the hip to the shadow officer, the FTO training officer. So that's kind of limited. And then if you look at Utah and Colorado, they would be more in line with what this bill looks to make happen. But I would also like to point out that Colorado has 27 different academies and community college options for certification. Utah has 7 basic courses a year in various colleges. The things that like Montana and Wyoming have in common is we have one state academy that offers 3 courses a year. So I'm not sure that more courses at our academy would address this, because I'm just not sure. We don't have a number on how many peace officers we have out in the state working autonomously without a training program at home. We don't know about that, and whether they've been through the basic training. My feeling in my conversations with most of our active members in WASCOP is it's very few and far between. Most agencies in the state of Wyoming would be impacted by this bill. I can only think of a handful of agencies that hire, send to the academy, train, and put on the road. Most agencies in Wyoming hire, train, send to the academy, finish training, put on their own. And I don't know of a single agency in the state that intends to put an officer on the road by themselves, autonomously, without basic training and a training program. But I'm very sure it does happen. I understand that. And as I would like to point out that my discussion with many of our administrators has been, as Director Walsh pointed out, it appears to be a concern and a liability. But is it? One case in 5 years? based on the other numbers that we have. I would say that agencies are taking that lack of training pretty seriously and putting safeguards on it to make sure that we don't put an officer in a position that's untenable and put our community in a position where we don't have trained officers working autonomously out there. But the good news about this is the conversations that we've had amongst our agencies have been very strong in that this would have an impact on almost every agency in the state. And we need to talk with Post about putting some more safeguards on this going forward, because whether this bill passes or not, maybe there's things that we can do just in working with Post, maybe a rule change, maybe a handshake agreement that puts more safeguards on training needs and requirements in law enforcement in Wyoming. And I'd stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Co-Chairman, go ahead, and then we'll go to Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, you understand why I'm concerned about this issue, and the, I guess the point I'd like to hear your feedback on is, if it's safe to have an officer working in our communities with a badge and a gun, making arrests, executing searches, potentially responding to life and death situations before they go to the academy, do they need the academy at all?
Mr. Thompson.
Well, Mr. Chairman, in the 1980s, if you had a college degree, you didn't go to the academy. I wouldn't say that, because I feel like the academy, the practical experience of the academy, and the networking capability with meeting other people in that career path helps you work through problems together, work as a team, work in a law enforcement environment. I mean, I don't think there's anybody in administration and law enforcement in Wyoming that thinks we need less training on anything. In a perfect world, we would be perfectly trained on all aspects of law enforcement. But I think the bigger question that would address, I don't know, a perceived liability or perceived concern with training is making sure that every officer at the very minimum goes through a standardized field training course in their agency, because that there's a national standard on that. There's a expectation and minimum standards that have been around for decades. And if we're not doing that, that should be something that we're advocating for in law enforcement in Wyoming.
Follow up, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So when these officers who are receiving minimal amounts of training from their agency before they go to the academy and they're working in their communities, if they make a poor choice, a poor decision, presently the liability rests with the state of Wyoming. Is that right for most of their liability? They're covered the same as every other peace officer. And so with those communities that do this, would they be willing to accept full liability for the actions of their peace officers before they go to the academy?
Mr. Thompson, the co-chairman's coming up with some pretty hot questions.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, co-chair, I don't know that liability rests with the state of Wyoming. The responsibility to defend the officer rests with the Attorney General's office, but the actual liability, I don't think it falls on the agency and their insurance provider. Am I correct? I'm sorry, I can't ask questions, but that's my understanding of it. Whether they're willing to accept that based on their lack of training would be a great questions that we would have to pose to those individual agencies.
Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think to that last point, in talking with my chief of police, I believe that they don't allow anyone on the street until they've gone through certification, the training academy, for that reason. One of my questions, because I think there might be middle ground somewhere between where this bill is and where we're at now. And how can we maybe find what that is in a sensible way that looks more like Wyoming? And I guess what my question to you would be, would you be opposed to requirements for FTO or pre-post trained officers to not be on the streets alone? Because I think that's where I have heartburn, is that this idea that someone with the legal right to kill civilians with impunity hasn't had the training. And so can we team them up with somebody that can help with that decision-making process? Is that something that would be more amicable to law enforcement administrators?
Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza, that's not an answer that I can give you today because we didn't ponder that in this bill. I do know that the discussions about more safeguards on training pre-academy and pre-one-year certification were conversations that we had. What those look like, I don't know, but I do believe that our membership are willing to have those conversations with Post, or whether it be legislative driven. I think there is ground that we can agree on.
Senator Cooper?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Thompson, we've got a lot of things going on here. We're getting some pretty good questions from some of the bigger agencies around the state, but I represent 11 small agencies, small law enforcement agencies from around the state. Some of them 1 to 3 officers, depending on their capability to hire. One is actually authorized to hire 2 officers, and they have 0 because they can't hire. That includes the lead in that community and the deputy or police officer, whatever you want to call it. Now, I think that we have a very legitimate argument here, because in the past we've done a lot of, years ago, we did a lot of hiring a 20-year-old kid and giving him a badge and a gun and telling him he's in charge of the world, and we ended up some real Rambos out there. And they did a lot of damage. And that's probably why we're talking about this today. But do you think, and to follow up on the other questions we've heard here, are the liabilities worse for having an agency and not having them staffed at all, or understaffed to the point that they are completely ineffectual? Or should we be, instead of pursuing something like this, should we be pursuing a legitimate field training officer program first and table this for later dates?
Thompson?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Cooper, I don't know. I mean, I have some ideas on that, but once again, these are things we didn't ponder prior to this. Where is that liability? I don't think there's a liability for agencies to provide law enforcement for their community, because there's not a relationship between the individuals requesting. I mean, there's some case law on that. So that kind of goes back to the earlier question about having trained people is better than having having no people is better than having untrained or poorly trained people. Those are all philosophical questions that we could all bring examples of both sides of that to the table here. I just don't think it's as common as we fear it is in Wyoming, but I do think that's something that is a lot easier to address, as we know there's a standard for field training in law enforcement in the United States. And it would be a lot easier lift to ensure that that is occurring in every police department, sheriff's office, and state agency in the state of Wyoming. So once again, I haven't talked to my members specifically about that concern question.
Any other questions for the sheriffs and chiefs? Representative Rodriguez-Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, so is there any, if you were to move forward with that collaboration with Post to ensure more safeguards are in place, is there any mechanism for that conversation to take place in the state? I mean, are there quarterly meetings that you all have, or what does that look like moving forward? I mean, do you also feel like Post has the authority and the setup, so to say, to move forward with such?
Thompson?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's a really good question, because that would be better answered by the director, but I do believe that the Post Commission can modify rules. And if they modify the rules to require certain requirements, that's something that could happen. And whether we have 100% participation in that conversation across the state, I don't know, but we have a very good communication link to almost every agency in the state through WASCOP, through email chains, virtual meetings, and in-person meetings. And we have about two in-person meetings a year, and we can incorporate this into any one of them. And when we start talking about bills such as we're considering today or mandates on FTO, there'll be a lot of people at the table to be part of that discussion, I do believe. Mr. Chairman, would you like the director to answer that?
Director,
Rules.
do you want to comment on that? Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Rodriguez-Williams, there's a mechanism where we do collaborate together. So we have quarterly meetings with the Post Commission. The Post Commission has rulemaking authority. And in fact, much of the script of how training is structured and approved goes through Post rules. And standardized FTO program could be incorporated in those Post rules.
Okay, anything else, committee? All right, gentlemen, thank you both. Any other testimony on this bill? Please come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Justin Schilling, Deputy Director, Wyoming Association of Municipalities. I know you're running a little bit behind, so I'll try to keep my remarks brief. WAM stands in opposition to of LSO or 25 LSO-0281. We've heard from members of all different shapes and sizes that they have concerns about the adverse effects this bill would have in relation to their ability to competitively hire law enforcement officers. First, though, I want to stress that no department or municipality I spoke with makes a habit of deploying uncertified officers before they've completed local on-the-job training, which in most cases takes them up to the next available opportunity to attend post. That said, eliminating the one-year grace period, we believe, leaves Wyoming communities in an awkward and less competitive position when it comes to hiring. If adopted, and with the current 3 offerings for post trainings in Douglas, we run into a situation where we might have a candidate that a community would like to hire that they would now have to extend a conditional delayed offer to. We'd like you to work here, but training just started, so we can't have you start for 4 months. In the meantime, that candidate is going to keep taking interviews, perhaps in state, but many times out of state, where their ability to start much sooner and potentially at full pay might be greater. We also know that poaching of recently certified officers is a very real issue for many of our smaller communities. Is it going to make matters better if a small town has to send a candidate to Douglas on day 1 before they perhaps even move to the community that they plan to work in, before they've built any ties or loyalty to that community? The current statute is functioning well for our communities, and pervasive issues based on new officers not receiving post-training first are not the current reality. We urge a no vote, as we were adding any further difficulty to hiring for local law enforcement will lead to more small and mid-sized communities to shutter their departments and add even more burden to our county sheriffs. Thank you for the opportunity, and I stand for any questions.
Mr. Schilling is with the Wyoming Association of Municipalities. Questions? Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Schilling, the state of Wyoming bears the cost of defending officers accused of misconduct. Would the municipalities be open to accepting the full cost of defense of officers during their temporary certification period, should they be sued?
Go ahead, Mr. Schilling.
Sure. Chairman Land and Co-Chairman Washit, I haven't posed that question to my membership, so I can't give you a good answer. I'd be happy to poll our membership and get back to you as soon as possible.
Thank you for that. Any other questions for Wham? Thank you, Mr. Schilling. Appreciate that. We wanted to hear from you, and we appreciate you being here. Anybody else want to come forward on this issue? We have a sheriff and a chief. Yeah, a sheriff and a chief. Let's get them both up here at the same time, and we appreciate you guys. take it away, Sheriff, you first, and then we'll come to the good chief. How about that? You got a green?
Okay, and I'm Sheriff Clint Becker from Converse County. This has been a very interesting discussion. I don't think, so I've been a peace officer for 38 years in the state of Wyoming and in Converse County. I did 20 years with the Wyoming Highway Patrol, and I've been sheriff since '07. There's a lot that goes into hiring a person. I know that years and years ago, from what I understand, and before my time, and maybe part of the beginning of my time, the people would be hired up the street. You go in, you'd interview, you'd be hired up the street. That is not the way we do things any longer. Usually from the time that we hire somebody to the time they get on the road and actually do patrolling, it's about a year. The time that it takes for us to do a background check on somebody before we'll hire them is months. Because it in turns the background check in turns, they got to go to psychological testing, polygraph testing, extensive background check, where we check these people. So they may not have prior law enforcement, and they may be prior law enforcement officers that we hire from another state. So once that happens, once we hire them, I swear them in, and as a sheriff, and then they start to work for us. And they work, at no time do they go on the road without an FTO. And believe me, even after they go through the academy, I still worry about them. I really do, because they still are inexperienced at that point. So that's our process. And for me, if I can't hire somebody, I'm not going to hire, they're not going to wait. So once we go through this total background check, and it's months, 2-3 months, we hire them and we put them through the academy. The academy doesn't put them through for free. And if we can't hire them, when we go through the background check and everything, if we don't hire them right away, they're not going to wait around to go to the academy, because we have 3 academies a year. And I can tell you that most of the time now, the academies are full or over max capacity. And we're also talking detention officers that we deal with. Because they're not just sending peace officers through the academy, they're sending detention officers, and that detention officer academy is a little bit less time than a peace officer. And if I hire a detention officer out of my detention to go to the road, if he desires to do that, and he passes another psychological test that tells us that this subject who has done good in the academy will now do good on the road, because it's 2 different situations. I don't know where the academy can get enough time to do that, with doing a peace officer's basic and a detention officer's basic. So I don't know. Detention officers, on the other hand, that's a very, very tough job, and it's a very high liability job. Not just being a peace officer on the street. We deal with the people in the jail that have a lot of mental issues, because we have nowhere to put them but in our jail, unfortunately. But don't forget the detention officers as well, and we hire them the same way. They're doing a program in the back, and they're being followed and graded. Now, I got to give the director back there a post, a good friend of mine, a little bit of a hard time, because our office is, our FTO program is 5 to 6 months long. And we're certified through post just recently, so I'll cut them a little slack, but we take that very seriously. So I don't know about the small agencies. I just can't see, these 2 and 3 agent, I've got 46 people in my office. 2 are not certified, because it's my assistant, thank God that I have her, and our receptionist. Everybody else in my office is a certified officers through the academy. I have more detention staff than I do road staff, because detention is something that a lot of people don't understand, the liability involved in that. So for me to be able to hire anybody, and even in it's hard for us to hire somebody, and I've got, 2 or 3 openings. And it's hard for me to hire somebody that I can get them through the actual hiring process, and before I say, no, we're not going to take you, because either the background doesn't go good, or the polygraph doesn't go good, or the psychological doesn't go good. So for me to get somebody to that point and then not be able to hire them, I think that field training is very, very important. I will tell you that. I think that for us, I think that, I don't want to say for us, but there is a route for the agencies within the state to go through post and maybe come up with a program through post. May not be 5 or 6 months like our program, but a minimal program that is certified through the Post Commission. That might be the more direct route to go. I understand you don't want us to hire somebody and just throw them on the street, and I don't really see that happening. I haven't, of course, I'm not 2 or 3 man department, but I do know that the hiring process is not the same as it used to be, where you did get Rambos, because Rambos won't get through our testing program now because of the evolving of the way that we do backgrounds and things of that nature. So I thank you for the time, if there's any questions.
Sheriff Becker, thank you very much. Any questions of the sheriff? Okay, let's go to the chief. Chief Thompson, good to see you again. Thanks for your patience and hanging with us.
Chief Thompson with Evansville. I can bring a unique perspective to you guys because I've worked in 3 small agencies, from 1 man up to the current agency. I'll talk a little bit about my prior agency that I took over. They were a 3-man agency, and when I took them over, they had 2 newly hired officers that I had no part of hiring, running around, as co-chair here was talking about, with guns, no training. I showed up and said, what are you doing? Park your butts in that. You can't just be out doing that. There were other complications that they didn't go through all the hiring criteria. But like everybody has echoed, the hiring practices of today are not the same. Since I've been the chief in Evansville for the last 6.5 years, I've interviewed probably around 85 applicants. 6 years ago, we'd get 14, 15 applicants for 1 position. Today, I get 1 or 2 applicants in 6 or 7 months. I have hired 8 people out of that. I'm very particular about, and I have a very robust hiring process, because I'd rather be shorthanded than wrong-handed because of the liability factors that we're talking. But making this change, and I'll throw Casper under the bus because they have way more money than I do, as he's sitting in the back there. If I had Casper's money, I'd be on board with this. But smaller agencies, and even like Sheriff Becker, his agency isn't as large as, say, Natrona County Sheriff's Office. We don't have the money to hold these people around, and I would rather start training these people because they're on a probationary period. And you can do as thorough of a background check as you want on these people. You're still going to miss something. They're still going to cause a problem down the road. And so I'd rather start working them through our FTO process, and ours is about 3 months, give or take, and through that process, sometimes they get expended, sometimes they don't. Because, and not that the academy is a lot of money, but it's I think $3,200 or $3,600 to our agencies. And so I don't have $100,000 in my training budget. So I'd rather weed these people out through that field training process, whether partner with either sergeant or one of our training officers. As in my budget, I'm $2.1 million for the Evansville Police Department, and in that I have about $22,000 towards training. Most budgets are, salary based, your salaries and stuff. So everything else in the operations, and And my training budget is, for my agency, is quite larger than a lot of these smaller agencies. When you look at the 2 and 3 and 5-man agencies, $3,000 is a lot of money for them. I can absorb it, but that's part of my mechanism of weeding these people out, because the tax money that are held judiciary, our judiciary responsibility is to do that wisely with them. My first agency on the road, I was a single officer, no training. I reached out to people I knew that had been trained and helped me work through it, but I had the mindset to do that. Some of the problem with the smaller agencies is they get new mayors every 4 years, or they're there for 2 years and they leave, and so they don't always follow and understand this process, and they're trying to get them. You look at Lingle. Lingle has a single officer, so if that officer retires, quits, whatever, who trains that single officer? So I want to circle back to the liability factor, because liability is an issue. Training is like a vaccination to not having those liabilities, but how do you address that? And I would opinion that rather than taking this current bill as it is, there are different FTO programs out there. Some people use different, the READ, and I'll just use READ as an example, or some other process out there. I think that having a rule that, whether it be through post, et cetera, that says, hey, they have to go through an accredited type FTO program, as there's different ones out there. And each agency has their own culture. I think several of you up there understand that just because, say, the Converse County Sheriff's Office wants to use this program, doesn't necessarily mean that this program is wrong and another agency likes this model better, as long as the training is consistent by national standards. And with that, because we all, anytime there's liability, they have to go through the State Risk Management Office. Create a rule that simply says, hey, if on the state level, if there's going to be a liability or there's an issue here, that we're only going to represent as long as your agency, whether it be 1-man, 2-man, 100-man, follows some standards of national practices in that world. I think that might be the easier way to address this, because in the state of Wyoming, we've got 99 communities, 23 counties, and expecting a agency, whether it be my 14-man agency, to follow or have the same practices as, say, Casper PD, Laramie PD, Cheyenne PD, we don't have those monies. And recruitment is tough. And it isn't just my agency. Every agency in this state is having recruitment issues. So I don't think that you can hold smaller agencies to the same type of concepts or hiring practices that the large agencies do. And with that, I'll stand for question.
Chief, thank you. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to be brief. Gentlemen, I'm not unsympathetic to the challenges of hiring law enforcement officers today, getting them trained, keeping shift staffed, and so forth. But as I sit here today, I feel like as a legislative panel, our responsibility is to our constituents, those people in our communities who might be having a poorly trained or undertrained officer pointing a gun at them, or an officer driving through their neighborhood at high speed before they've been well trained, right? And so I think we have to both embrace the realities of your world in terms of trying to recruit and retain and hire and train and so forth. But we also have to be attentive to the people in our communities who rely on our professional law enforcement officers with their safety, with their search and seizure issues and all those sorts of things. And so I don't dispute what you're saying about the challenges that you all face. But if I'm a citizen in my community and I have a police officer pointing a gun at me, I would really, really hope that that officer is as well trained as the state of Wyoming can make him. And if it means that the state has to commit more resources so that the academy can host a 4th POB class every year, if it means that we have to put some money into training budgets for counties and municipalities that don't have adequate training budgets, I'm open to that discussion too. But I think the reason this is on the agenda today is the safety and well-being of the citizens of the state of Wyoming.
I don't think there was a question in there, gentlemen, but good thoughts from the co-chairman. Appreciate both of you guys staying here with us on this one. We've learned a lot from both of you. Thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to come forward and visit with us about this bill? Is there anyone else who wishes to come forward? Committee, we have a motion to table on.
Oh, wait, let's make a motion to,
Do we want to?
no, you have to, you can't table a motion that's not on the table. So I move the bill, and if it doesn't get a second, you don't have to table it. But I expect Mr. Co-Chairman will second it.
So, Senator, my only question to you, since you've been through some of these sorts of things in the past, is that what I did was set aside a motion to table, which takes precedence over anything else. And my
Except
thought
for the
was we
point
had
of
to
order,
get
sir.
To that, but
The point of order would be the motion to table is about the bill. We don't have the bill on the table. So I'll put the bill on the table, then she can make her motion.
okay, it's been moved and seconded by the co-chairman, moved by Senator Case to take up the bill. So the bill is now on the table.
So you did rule it out of order. Now he's made his motion and you want me to remake my motion?
Representative, the bill is now under consideration, so
Okay.
other motions could be made.
Thank you. Then I will make or renew my motion to table this bill.
And
Indefinitely.
seconded by Senator Cooper. So we are back to where we were a few minutes ago, and hopefully we did that properly. And thank you, Senator, for putting it on the table so that we could consider this. That is non-debatable. Mr. Fuller, I saw you doing this. Did we properly, pardon? Correct. Please take roll on. On the motion to table. On the motion to table. We could do it by voice? Okay, thank you. All in favor of tabling this bill, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say no. No. The ayes have it. Just to make sure, please raise your hand if you're in favor of tabling the bill this afternoon. Okay, 8. And that is a majority, and so we will table the bill. I want to thank all who came forward on the bill to share information. I think sometimes you don't have to pass a bill to have some impact. I hope that had a little bit of impact, and I would encourage all, Sheriff, Chief, Mr. Thompson, let's keep our eye on that ball and make sure it doesn't bounce out of bounds. Let's move on. So next up for our consideration is,
1:45.
is it only 1:45?
Yeah.
Jeez, we're doing really good. If we could go back on daylight savings or back it up one more hour, we'd be all right. Let's go to LSO 282, Governmental Claims Negligent Investigations. And Mr. Fuller, can you walk us through that one,
Yep,
please?
Mr. Chairman, I can. I think there was another item as follow-up from law enforcement concerning search and seizure training. And I'm not sure, Mr. Chairman, if you wanted to hear on that issue.
My apologies. I think Mr. Fuller, the rules on search and seizure training, I did not visit with you about that, but is there someone here that would like to address that? Director Walsh. Director Walsh, my apologies. I skipped over that, and I don't want to skip over you, so. And then we will take up that next bill too, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Again, Chris Walsh with Peace Officer Standards and Training. At our, our September meeting, we discussed search and seizure, whether or not it might be appropriate to have ongoing training mandated by legislation or have it directed through post rule. On October 24th of this year, the commission met. I posed that question to the commission. The commission is ready, willing, and able to address that issue through our rules. It's a search and seizure. When I say search and seizure, let me take that to the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution. Absolutely a foundational skill in all patrol officers' lives, their daily lives. So this includes anything from taking a person's papers, their personal effects, entering their house, arresting them, use of deadly force, use of any kind of force. So it's a critical skill that I think every agency and every officer understands is very important. So the commission is willing to address this in rules. I pose this to the chiefs and sheriffs because it is such an impacting situation. Obviously, we need their input on that. To date, I've had, and it hasn't been put out that long, so it was after the commission approved it on October 24th that I put it out. I've heard from 6 sheriffs and 6 chiefs. All of them recognize the need for and the importance of the issue and would like to see that in post rule as opposed to in any other method. Currently, I don't have a recommendation to bring before you because I don't feel 6 of the large organization and all of us is a good representation. Other than I can tell you, our last topic, obviously we have a lot of different viewpoints on that. There was not different viewpoints on this. There was a request. And you've heard, and it's very rightfully so, like Chief Thompson said, a lot of our agencies do not have a lot of funding. So the request that I had was, we think this is a fantastic idea. Go ahead and mandate this in your perishable skills requirements as a subset of requirement. And please find a way to put this on regionally across the state of Wyoming in a consistent manner and help us get it funded. So here I am with my hand out, but.
I was going to say, Director, this is not the Appropriations Committee, but we'll sure listen.
Mr. Chair, it's like a warm-up. I'm just trying to get ready for the big show. So there's support for this. And just to remind everybody, part of the ongoing training requirements and the advancement requirements that I spoke of earlier, 10 hours of officers required training have to be in the areas of what we call perishable skills. Think of a perishable skill as something that has to be immediately recalled. If you make a traffic stop, you can know there's 5 traffic violations there and not know what statute they associate to and exactly the wording, because you can look it up. When you apply force, when you decide to engage in a high-speed pursuit, when you decide to go through somebody's front door or make an arrest, you have to do that right. You have to do it from recall, and the expectation is that you are 100% correct, the most perfect human that's ever lived. It's a difficult standard. So, of course, seeing to it that one aspect of that perishable skills would require search and seizure is reasonable. Everybody seems to be amicable to it. It doesn't seem to be controversial. And I want to get some more details before we solidify that and bring it forward and let you know my thoughts and the thoughts of law enforcement collectively in the state.
Director, thank you. Again, I didn't mean to skip over a very important topic. And many of us, I think, would be amenable to supporting whatever you decide to come forward with and share with our colleagues. So we'll stay in touch with you on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Of the director. Thank you. Thank you much, Chris. Appreciate it. Okay, so let's go to 282 then. Mr. Fuller, if you don't mind walking us through.
Yep, so 25 LSO 282 0.5, this is 6-01 in the online meeting materials. In September, the committee heard about a Wyoming Supreme Court opinion, Palmegel versus Briggs, where the court held that law enforcement officers owe a duty to the suspect in a criminal investigation to investigate as reasonable peace officers of ordinary prudence under like circumstances. Mr. Chairman, this bill draft would abrogate that holding. and provide the opposite in the Wyoming Governmental Claims Act. So page 2, lines 1 and 2 is simply a conforming amendment to 139, 112. And then page 2, line 6, a new subsection B that provides that no governmental entity shall be liable for damages to a criminal suspect resulting from a peace officer's negligent investigation while acting within the scope of the peace officer's duties. Then page 2, line 11 is what I would just characterize as an intent statement, just a statement of legislative intent that the bill is intended to abrogate the holding of that case and provide that governmental entities are not liable to a suspect for negligent investigation. Page 3, line 1 is applicability. This would apply to all claims on and after the effective date of this act, which is currently set for as an immediate effective date. With that, Mr. Chairman, happy to answer questions.
Questions for Mr. Fuller? Any questions? Thank you, Ryan, appreciate that. Would anyone like to come forward and address the committee on 282, working draft point 5? Mr. Thompson, we're getting a lot of quality time together today.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Alan Thompson, the Executive Director of WASCOP. Our organization had quite a bit of discussion about this over the last few weeks, and the general consensus is that the bill as written seems to address the concern that we had with the decision. And I guess I would like to point out that most of the discussion kind of revolved around, whether this, we operated prior to the Supreme Court decision with the belief that this was not a liability for law enforcement. And then we learned of a new liability, and we've seen it mentioned in several lawsuits for various things that have hit over the last year. We'll see that the negligent investigation is one of the things that is filed in the lawsuit. So trying to wrap our mind around what is negligent and what is not has kind of been a struggle. The standard for negligence has always rested on the reasonable, ordinary, and prudent person test. Would a reasonable, ordinary, and prudent person also do the issue at hand? The problem with determining a negligent investigation rests with determining what a reasonable officer would do in a like situation. And that seems to our members to be a very hard thing to wrap our mind around, what is and isn't a negligent investigation. And giving that affordability to a suspect in a case that we don't have any kind of obligation to a victim in a case is concerning. So in general terms, we think that this helps law enforcement better understand their requirements, and it doesn't absolve them from other bad actions. I mean, there are torts that law enforcement in Wyoming are responsible for and responsible to the public for, and those would continue. And I would stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions? Thank you, Mr. Thompson, appreciate it. Thank you very much. Any other testimony on 282? Mr. Shockey, good afternoon.
Thank you.
Good to see you again. Please make sure that's green and pull it good and close to you, and we're all set.
I will do that.
And introduce yourself. Thank you.
My name is Gary Shockey. I am here both on behalf of the Wyoming Trial Lawyers Association and myself. I happen to be the attorney who represented Deborah Palm Eagle in the case, the Palm Eagle case that, and I'm still representing her, by the way, because the case is ongoing. And so I'm kind of hamstrung from talking about a lot of details in the case, but I can share some of them. And but what I'd like to start out with first, though, is just, and I'm afraid to do it in front of a former law professor for being too oversimplifying, but currently claims against peace officers are authorized for torts. That's a funny word. I've thought it's funny since I first heard it in law school, but a tort actually has three parts to it, simplifying. And I looked over, and it looks like that coat rack has 4 parts to it, but if you imagine a 3-part stool, a tort consists of negligence, causation between the negligence, and the damage. And so you have three things there. If you take away the negligence aspect of a tort, you're essentially taking away any claim at all. And so this bill, in its current form, is broad enough that there would be no claims for a tort against a peace officer for any kind of negligence in investigating. And that's a pretty broad brush to take. It would effectively eliminate a good bit of the Governmental Claims Act authorizing citizens to have claims against peace officers. I like to think of this too as it isn't unusual for anybody to have to follow a rule and not be negligent. Anybody who's had a job knows that you're going to have job requirements. If you drive a company vehicle, you can't do it negligently. An example is if you are driving your company vehicle and run a red light, that's negligence, and the company can be held responsible for that. And it's also from the law and the statutes and the case law. If you run the red light, that's negligence, and you can be responsible for it. It isn't a new concept then to expect peace officers also to conduct themselves in non-negligent fashions. And that's all that the Palm-Egley decision does is it says, if a peace officer conducts the investigation negligently, then there's one aspect of the 3 prongs of a tort that can result in liability to either the officer or the agency, or DCI in this case. So it isn't a complex notion to understand that nobody should be negligent. And, you know, I have to be not negligent when I represent a client. Doctors have to be not negligent when they take care of their patients. And we expect that peace officers, when they investigate a case, would not be negligent in doing that. Well, in my case, what little I'm comfortable sharing with is I have a former DCI agent who has cataloged a list of negligent acts or omissions in my case, and that, I believe, that's what gets me forward into the realm of a tort. Was a tort committed then? And we aren't expecting much of peace officers to do things with the ordinary care. You heard earlier a discussion about being reasonable and prudent in what you do. That's all we're asking of peace officers in the holding of the Palm-Egley case, just to do it as other police officers would do if in the opinion of experts in the field, your conduct wasn't reasonable or prudent, then you can be found to be negligent. This isn't a new case either. There are 5 or 6 cases. I won't document them to you or list them to you right now, but the Wyoming Supreme Court has ruled for 30 years that there has to be ordinary care exercised in the investigation of claims by law enforcement and by peace officers. So this bill isn't just asking you to effectively legislatively undo what the Supreme Court did in my case. This bill is asking for, is the legislature saying, we're going to undo 30 years of Supreme Court precedent in the event that you would go forward with it. Now, I've been talking about negligence, but here is the big difficulty for a person who's been harmed by a negligent investigation. Here, that is the concept of qualified immunity. And every peace officer and others, you've probably heard the phrase qualified immunity. It's an excuse. You can be negligent, but you get an excuse for your negligence under the doctrine of qualified immunity if you've acted in good faith and acted reasonably. So that even if a peace officer is found to have acted negligently or not acted negligently, he has this huge defense that, well, it was reasonable for me to do this. And I acted reasonably and I acted in good faith and I had no intention whatsoever to take away anybody's rights or to harm anybody, just doing my job the way I thought I would. And that is a powerful defense. It's powerful, not only in my case, it's coming up and I have to be prepared for that, but federally and at state levels. You see it a lot more in the federal courts where the defense of qualified immunity is raised and very often granted. And here's what happens ordinarily this defense is also raised right at the beginning of a case. In other words, a law enforcement person or peace officer or agency is sued and they believe that they have the qualified immunity defense. It's raised first thing. And it's usually raised before the plaintiff in the case even gets the benefit of any kind of fact discovery or any kind of process to develop facts to argue against it. And then if the judge happens to deny the motion, the defendant, the peace officer, the agency gets to appeal it immediately to the appellate court. And so it happens ordinarily right at the beginning of the case. These issues are then resolved at the beginning of the case before many defense costs are incurred. And so the qualified immunity defense in a case is extraordinarily powerful. It can be exercised early on in the case, and it gives the peace officer or law enforcement agency a quick out if the judge happens to agree that the officer acted in good faith and reasonably. And so for that reason, both from my experience in the law and also just, from the notion that people need to be responsible for what they do, whatever their job might be, that we strongly oppose this motion or this bill. And the final thing I'll say is it uses the word suspect. And I had to research that word very carefully when I was doing my research for the appeal to the Wyoming Supreme Court. And the word suspect really has no force or meaning in the criminal law. You're either charged or you're not charged. You're under investigation or you're not under investigation. The only time that I found in recent history for many, many years where suspect had any legal effect was in the stop and frisk cases that you heard about were so prevalent many years ago. And so just technically, the language of the bill has that problem and many more, but I won't address those now, and I stand open for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Shockey, thank you. Appreciate it. Any questions of our good friend who is a trial attorney? Thank you, Mr. Shockey.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I also, with permission, I'll have about 2 or 3 minutes on the next topic of limitation on, or raising the limits on damages. So thank you very much,
I'm glad
Mr.
you
Chairman.
can stick around. We're fighting our way to get to it. Oh, excuse me. Representative Provenza does have a question.
Sorry, I delayed. I was having, my brain stopped working. You were correct, you were the attorney in the case that is the genesis of this bill.
Yes,
right?
Deborah Palmegley.
When we had discussion at the last meeting, we talked about some of the case facts, and there were a lot of facts about this case that gave me a lot of heartburn and why we would change the law based on this case. My understanding is that the district attorney was censured in part because of their actions during this case. The lead investigator on this case was also found to have committed perjury, I believe. Can you speak to that before we change this law? I kind of want to know, is this case clean enough for us to change the law for everybody else?
No, my opinion, and thank you, Representative and Mr. Chairman. But my case, actually, I haven't focused hardly on any of the controversy that you just mention, because that was at the preliminary hearing. That's after months of, we allege, negligent investigation, failure to investigate for exculpatory evidence that would have cleared my client and saved her huge costs to go through the preliminary hearing, and saved her 6 or 8 weeks of absolute misery, forced to be on the farm away from her home in Colorado. Our case is focused on what the agent did or didn't do in terms of looking into leads that weren't followed, following up with, our people had testing on the hemp product that they had grown that showed that it was within legal limits, and nothing was done to follow up on that. In fact, the agency and DCI just, their lawyers say, well, we get fake stuff like that all the time, so we didn't pay any attention to it. So the case, again, if I felt comfortable, I would tell you that 7 or 8 or 10 items of negligence or non-action that we have documented that should have been done by a reasonable officer. Now, of course, there's the other side, and there'll be an expert witness, and there is an expert witness who will say differently, and that's how it needs to be resolved, and that's only on the issue of negligent investigation. So I hope that answers your question.
Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So how long has this suit been going on in just this one case with this officer?
I have to try and remember, about 2.5 to 3 years. Oh, Mr. Chairman and Representative Oakley, I'm sorry. I'm terrible at formalities. I'm sorry.
That is not a problem.
Except with the
Go
judge.
ahead.
I know to say, yes, Your Honor, to the judge.
We're fine. Go ahead.
Thank you. About 2.5 or 3 years, I filed the case. We went through pretty much a lot of ordinary discovery and depositions and all that, and it came time for hearings with the judge. And it was the judge who brought this issue up, actually, late in the case, in my case. And so we went, and we were in federal court, by the way. And so the judge certified this issue of negligent investigation to the Wyoming Supreme Court, and that whole process took several months to a year. And it was not quite a year ago then that we got the decision from the Wyoming Supreme Court saying, yes, Wyoming recognizes that a cause of action for negligent investigation. Now we're back to the federal court, and we have a trial date on March 3rd. So it's been 2.5 or more years. And I'm sorry, I can't remember the exact date.
Thank you. Anything else, committee? Okay, Mr. Shockey, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else on 282? Anyone else like to come forward on this bill? Come on forward. Absolutely, please. Come on up, make sure you get a green light and introduce yourselves.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Mark Aronowitz. I'm Director of Lawyers and Advocates for Wyoming, a public interest law firm. I'm here for the next bill as well, but very briefly on this one. The overview of the Wyoming Governmental Claims Act, I think everyone's pretty familiar with it by now. The history is the state has sovereign immunity from any kind of liability, just like the king did back in England. Maybe there's 10 exceptions to that rule through the Wyoming Governmental Claims Act. Negligent operation of a motor vehicle, medical malpractice, breach of contract. It's just a few things. This is one of those things. So to take this out of one of the very few things that a citizen can do if the state has violated their rights is a big deal. And it says right there on page 1, for the negligent investigations of peace officers. I mean, negligence is by definition the failure to act reasonably. So it's saying if peace officers are unreasonable to citizens, we don't want citizens to have any recourse or any ability to even try to do something. And doing something's really, really hard with qualified immunity anyway. But I just wanted to reiterate, it's a big deal. There's so few claims that can be made. I don't understand why we would want to protect negligence or negligence investigations just as a general policy choice. So against this legislation for whatever that's worth.
Granted, thank you. Appreciate you being here. Any questions? Okay. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Is there a comparable, thank you, Mr. Chairman, but is there a comparable duty to a victim of crime? If we have a duty to not be negligent toward a perpetrator, do we have a comparable in the law, a comparable duty to the victim of a crime, an individual victim of a crime?
Mr. Chairman, and, Mr. Chairman, I believe so. I'm not perfectly equipped to speak to it. The peace officer duties, within the Governmental Claims Act, I would think they flow to everyone, suspects or victims or just general citizens, to all of us. So I would think within the realm of peace officer that duty flows to all.
Anything else, committee? Okay, Mark, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, we are on testimony for 282, working draft .5. It's all about the governmental claims in negligent investigations. Anyone else want to come forward? Do we have anyone online who wishes to testify on this bill? Nobody else. Former Representative Laux, it's good to see you. And you know where we are on this bill, I hope, because in the past you've had interest in this area. So
Apologize, I was watching the computer earlier, and I don't know which bill you're on.
that's okay. We're on the Governmental Claims Negligent Investigations Bill. Okay. I'm going to close testimony, committee. What's your pleasure on this bill?
Move the bill.
Okay, moved by the co-chairman and seconded by Representative Oakley. Discussion. Go ahead, Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have some discussion on this bill. I always think it's an interesting thing, for us to get to weigh in and give our opinions on it, whether we go up there and testify or not. And there wasn't much, there was no testimony as far as being for this. So I'm going to give some of my thoughts on some of the testimony that was given. So a couple of things that is key. It was said a couple of times, like, this is not a new concept. I disagree with that. Now, the concept of negligence certainly isn't, but this is negligent investigation. And as Justice Couch said, in his very reasoned opinion, and in my estimation, one of the strongest on criminal law and understanding that sits on the Supreme Court, said that he believes that this puts Wyoming in a unique position. Reading from it, it appears that every other state that has considered whether suspects may sue an officer for negligent investigation has concluded he or she may not, meaning we are the only ones. So to say that, and then when I heard this discussion, it was just about negligence, saying that we should expect our officers to behave in reasonable and prudent manners. Of course we do. Of course we do. And there's 1,000 checks on their behavior in different ways, from agency policy, from constitutional law, to say that they are not expected or held to a legal standard unless they can be sued for criminal investigation is incorrect in my estimation. And so I think one of the things that, to me, conceptually, that you have to think of with this, that it is, like I say, saying it's not a new concept, it is a new concept in this, because when you look at the word investigation, when you first just look at negligent, you want to say, well, of course we don't want negligence. Nobody wants negligent action in any way. But this is about negligent investigation. And one of the things that Justice Couch points out, in a way, is what this does is conditions a new tort, a new cause of action on the outcome of prosecution. That's kind of what happened in this case. So they go forward, they're fined, and it wasn't a great case. They weren't the great facts, but the judge dismisses the case. So they go back and say, therefore, the officer was negligent in investigation. And it's sort of a backwards way, I think, of analyzing negligence because it's part of the investigation, which is the initial part of a criminal case. So I think it is a big deal. I think Justice Couts did a great job of articulating it. It was a 3-2 opinion. And again, I give his opinion great weight. And when I read what he said, I completely agree. I do not think we want to create a new tort against officers, 3 years of, getting tied up and getting sued for their investigation. Because minds might differ and outcomes might differ as to what happens as a case moves forward. And it's so easy to go back in hindsight and say what should have been done in an investigation. I think this is a dangerous direction that this has gone, and I think this can fix it, and I support this bill.
Representative Chesty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I speak against the bill. I don't think that this bill creates a new cause of action against police officers. The cause of action has always existed. It's called negligence. And the Governmental Immunity Act has been around for many, many years. That it says it does carve out this exception. And so that's not new. It's been around a long time. What this bill does is it returns us to the days of the king shall do no wrong. It returns us to the days of sovereign immunity. And that is going backwards. That's a step backwards, I think. Individuals who have been harmed by the negligence of another person ought to have some redress. So I have read the Supreme Court decision. It's a 3-2, as Representative Oakley has suggested. The 3 were, I think this is a good compromise between balancing the rights of individuals and police officers. Because the doctrine of qualified immunity still exists, that's going to be a huge tool. And that's the new concept. Qualified immunity is a newer concept, and this leaves that in place. The Supreme Court decision leaves qualified immunity as a defense, and that's the compromise between balancing the rights of the police officers and the rights of the victims. I think they got it right, and I don't think it's the purview of this judiciary, of this legislature, to overturn Supreme Court decisions. I thought the case was litigated, decided by the body that decides these kinds of things, the Supreme Court, and I would not like to overturn the Supreme Court.
Thank you, Representative. Anything else? Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We heard from 2 lawyers, and while I have a PhD, I'm just a hillbilly at heart. It's interesting to me that we're not willing to place training requirements on officers. And we're also interested in waiving any protection for the public from those untrained or even trained officers. It's government protecting itself. But then not giving ourselves basic standards or any recourse for the public. I can't support that. I think that, to me, that feels like good old boys stuff. So I'm in opposition to this bill.
Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I don't have a PhD, but I see some awful good legal minds in here. I'm just a poor old sheepherder from the Bighorn Basin, but what I see is paragraph E being in direct conflict to paragraph A on page 2. And I fully support the concept of qualified immunity, but I think there still has to be accountability. And I think this removes any perception of accountability from the police officers. And so I will be in opposition to this bill.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just asked members of the committee, when's the last time you looked at a newspaper headline that said, crime victim sues police because case wasn't filed? Doesn't happen. There's no cause of action. And so what we're doing here is we're saying the police have a duty to the suspected perpetrator of a crime, but they have no similar duty to the victim of a crime. I think this is a proper response. It is the purview of the legislature to be a check and balance on the Supreme Court, and I'm going to be in favor of this bill.
Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just in response to the sheep herder's comment down here, I'm leaving the hillbilly for the next time. I would point out that what we're saying with this bill, we're not taking away all accountability. So the statute says tortious conduct. Well, that includes much more than negligence. That's the word we've been throwing around here that Mr. Shockey talked about, but there's lots of things. For example, gross negligence, intentional acts, there's all sorts of things that fall within that statute. So what we're saying is ordinary negligence, that's how I read it, only in the case of investigating a suspect is exempted from that provision, right? We're not saying all tortious acts, just that one. And so I do believe there's still going to be accountability for law enforcement officers. They're not going to have free rein to do whatever they want. It's just if they make a mistake in the investigation of a crime, they're not going to get sued for that, if they happen to fall outside of, qualified immunity. But just wanted to point that out. I think there's still some protections for the public in here when it comes to the actions of law enforcement.
Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly, because it was, we don't want to overturn the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's job is to interpret what they believe the law to be. Doesn't have anything to do on whether those 5 people think that's the way it should be. They don't do that. So this was read as what I see, where a lot of people didn't believe that we were saying that we don't think the law should be, that it includes investigations. They interpreted that it does include it. It's proper, as said, then for us, if we don't want investigations to be a new tort, a cause of action that hasn't been included before, or if it was included according to the Supreme Court, it is certainly within our purview to say we don't want to include investigations as its own negligent action. So it's not stepping on the toes, it's exactly what we do.
Question. So we're going to come to the question on this, and I recall the great Senator Coe from Park County, one of the awesome guys who served many years in this body, and he one day said, yeah, that's right. He said, I've got friends on this side of the issue, and I got friends on this side of the issue, and I stand with my friends. That's where I'm at, I'll tell you. Anyway, question on the bill. Please take roll on 282.
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote for 25 LSO 282, governmental claims, negligent investigations. Senator Case? No. Senator Cooper?
No.
Senator Furphy?
Aye.
Senator Schuler? Representative Chestick?
No.
Representative Craigo? Representative Haraldson?
No.
Representative Jennings? Representative Nemec? Representative Oakley?
Aye.
Representative Provenza? No. Representative Rodriguez-Williams?
Aye.
Co-Chairman Washit?
Aye.
Chairman Landon?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, we have 8 ayes, 6 noes.
Boy, another one of those House bills, that bill.
Oh, you missed that one.
That bill has passed. It'll go to the session in January and work ahead. Plenty of time to have much more dialogue on that. I've got to step out, Mr. Co-Chairman, and weigh in on another legislative meeting. And so I'll turn the gavel over to you and we can proceed with further things. So I'll be back.
Representative Rodriguez-Williams?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While we're still on the topic of peace officers and negligent investigations, during the last meeting, we heard testimony from the director of Post on contractual investigations that they conduct. I was just wondering if I can briefly follow up and ask just briefly a couple more questions of the director.
Is the director of Post still in the room? We're going to see if he's still available. The ship may have sailed. I think he may have been rounded up. We'll see here. All right. Should have pressed the down button a little sooner, huh? All right, we'll be brief. Representative Rodriguez-Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Walsh, thank you for coming back. I mentioned to the chairman that last committee meeting, we talked a little bit about investigations that are conducted within your agency and outsourcing them to contractors due to lack of staffing and so forth. And so I was just hoping to follow up with you on a couple of questions because I've received quite a bit of opinion on the topic since the last meeting, if I may.
Certainly.
So is it common practice for Post to open an investigation after a law enforcement agency has already handled an investigation internally?
Director.
Mr. Co-Chairman, Representative Rodriguez-Williams, that does occur. It is not common practice. The most common source of complaints is from the agency itself or an outside criminal investigation into an activity. There are occasions where Post will open an investigation after it's been concluded internally.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Director, when you receive these complaints, do you inquire as to whether or not the agency has already investigated and closed the complaint? And furthermore, like, what are your future plans as Post, specifically in your role in the certification and investigation of police officers as they pertain to these?
Director.
Mr. Co-Chairman, Representative, so yes, it is standard practice to ask for the internal investigation from an agency. Now, that may or may not be forthcoming. And then, a completely independent investigation will have to be done, or that investigation that's already been conducted will be incorporated into the Post investigation. And the second part of your question is, what are the future plans? Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing other than what we're doing now. I'm probably not hitting your question.
Want to clarify your question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, I'll repeat it. So what are your plans related to Post's role in the certification and investigation of police officers? And if I might add to, pardon my ignorance, but are you funded under the AG's office, your funding?
Director.
Mr. Co-Chair, Representative, yes, we are funded through the Attorney General's office. My future plans will be, as far as the investigative aspect of things, will be to continue to ask. I would like to have a full-time Post investigator. And those things, as you well know, get presented and the needs and that kind of stuff, and then approved or disapproved by the legislature.
We're done with you for now. You're free to go on the elevator and escape.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Thank you, members of the commission.
All right, members, we're not going to take a break. We're at 3:30 in the afternoon, and that was our time that we had scheduled for recess. So we have one more topic before us. Members, if you need to take a step out, feel free, and we'll just keep plugging along. Mr. Fuller, would you take us through 25 LSO 0130 version .5?
Yep, and Mr. Chairman, 7-01 in the online meeting materials. This is a bill draft the committee considered in September, and after hearing testimony from various groups, the committee continued consideration of the draft to this meeting. This bill draft would amend the maximum liability amounts for claims that are authorized and available under the Wyoming Governmental Claims Act. With the exception of one staff comment, which I'll get to in a minute, this bill draft is identical to what the committee considered in September. So on page 2, lines 6 and 7, for any claimant, for any number of claims from a single transaction or occurrence, the liability of a governmental entity is increased from $250,000 to $1 million. Then page 2, lines 11 and 12, the maximum liability for all claims of all claimants from a single transaction is increased from $500,000 to $2 million. The staff comment just notes the provision for the maximum liability amount for claims involving healthcare providers is provided on the bottom of page 2 and the top of page 3. Then the staff comment that begins on page 3, Mr. Chairman, is there was discussion about a tiered or an incremental increase to the maximum liability amounts. A placeholder, a framework, if you will, for that approach is in the staff comment, starting on page 3, line 24, going through page 4, line 21. And for that approach, there would need to be dollar amounts and dates that would need to be filled in. With that, if the committee goes that way, the committee may wish to consider what the dividing line is for, when a claim accrues, for example, if they're going to specify dates, that would trigger different amounts. Then, Mr. Chairman, finally, per you and the co-chairman, beginning on page 4, line 35 is another kind of alternate approach that was discussed. And on the top of page 5, this approach would provide for the all claims of all claimants a separate amount if the single transaction involves not less than some number of claimants. Then there would be an increased amount for the committee to determine that would apply in those situations. Page 5, line 15 just notes that this would apply to all claims that are based on a transaction or occurrence after the effective date of the act, which is July 1, 2025. With that, Mr. Chairman, happy to answer questions.
I may have got, excuse me, thank you for that update, Mr. Fuller. I may have gotten ahead of myself. Is this the bill that was tabled at the last meeting?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, my apologies. That is correct. It was.
So committee will need a motion to bring the bill off the table. And Mr. Fuller, I believe that requires a 2/3 majority vote to bring the bill off the back on the table. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, I can double check. I thought it was a simple majority.
I'll go with a simple majority. So do I have a motion to bring the bill back on the table? Motion by Representative Chestick. Is there a second? Second by Representative Provenza. Discussion on the motion. It is debatable to bring it off the to bring it back on the table. Discussion, Representative Crago.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just am thinking back about our discussion at the last meeting, and I don't know if it was the traditional motion to table the bill. I think what we said is we just wanted to have some more time for discussion between the stakeholders, because we had a lot of discussion about the dollar amount. And I think there was some desire to change the dollar amount, but I think a lot of us didn't like the dollar amount in the proposed bill. And so we sort of put it back on some of the parties involved and said, hey, can you come up with a different idea and bring it to us at our next meeting? That's how I kind of remember the discussion going.
Clarissa, can you look at the minutes and refresh our memory whether there was in fact a motion to table? I believe there was, but because I think I was in the chair at the time. And
Mr. Chairman, possibly we tabled it till this meeting. You can table a motion to a specific time. And if that case, we wouldn't have to bring it back off because the original motion said to table.
As I recall, there was a table and then there was a straw poll taken just for purposes of notice so that people who might want to testify on the bill would know that there was a likelihood that we would have further conversation about this bill. Carissa, anything to
Mr. Chairman, that's my recollection. There was the motion to table that was adopted. At the end of the meeting, I had inquired, Mr. Chairman, for purposes of stakeholders, interested in the bill, whether it would be considered again at this meeting. And the indication was, I believe through a show of hands, that a majority did want to see that considered, at this meeting.
Very good. So further discussion? Okay, all clear. We're going to be voting on whether or not to bring this bill back up for discussion today. All those in favor, raise your hand or say aye. Let's say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The motion carries. We're back. Have the bill properly before the committee. Is there anyone in the room wishing to testify with respect to 20130 version 0.5? Mark, please come forward. Please state your name again for the record and who you represent, and then tell us what you'd like us to hear about the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mark Aronowitz, this time as Secretary Treasurer of Wyoming Trial Lawyers Association and also as the Director of Lawyers and Advocates for Wyoming. I guess two things to start. We were asked to get together with folks opposing the bill, and we did that, and I'm sure they're here too and ready to speak. I think our position is the bill should move forward, and theirs is that it should not. Our position would be to keep the numbers the way they are in here, to come close to adjusting for inflation since 1979. And I think the opposition would say to not do that, or alternatively to keep them as low as possible, I think is a fair summary. But we did get together as asked to. That was, I think, last week or the week before. So first, a thank you to the committee for studying this, the past few committee hearings that you've had. Trial lawyers brought this issue that these numbers haven't been updated since 1979 or 1986, where they actually decreased a little bit. We thought that was a problem worthy of being discussed in the interim, and it has been discussed. Wyoming is $250,000 per claim, $500,000 per occurrence. It's been that way for decades. Colorado is $424,000 per claim, $1.195 million per occurrence. Utah is $827,000 per claim for an injury, $326,000 for a property claim, and then the total cap is $3.329 million in Utah. Idaho is just $500,000 for both. Nebraska doesn't have caps, South Dakota doesn't have any caps, and Montana is $750,000 and $1.5 million. I contacted the state archives to find out a little bit about what were some of the numbers in 1979, in case you find it interesting. Governor's salary was $45,000. Secretary of State, $28,000. The legislative per diem was $36. Legislative daily salary was $30. Most numbers, right, some of it hasn't changed. Most numbers have gone up, 300 to 500% over the years. This is one thing that just has not. The consumer price index, if we take the 250 today, would be 1.085 million. The 500,000 would be 2.171 million. That's just statistical background. The reason that this stuff matters is a really rare but exceptional reason, and it's for the biggest possible claims and the biggest possible tragedies. We have 4 real-world examples from maybe the last 10 years. One, I think, has been discussed before, but the burning wood chip fire at the Casper landfill that caused millions of dollars of property damage, and that was capped at $500,000, even though it was closer to $4 million in actual damage. Here, a city-managed ski area failed to prevent a reckless skier from colliding with a mother and daughter. The 5-year-old daughter died. The mother had a horrible brain injury. That case was capped at $500,000. Current case, a man riding a motorcycle in Cheyenne was struck by a city bus. His medical expenses alone are 1.2 million. The cap is 250. And then a recent tragedy in Sheridan, a city snowplow driver failed to stop at a stop sign and collided with a 29-year-old man and his fiance, and the 29-year-old man died. So his family received the $250,000 maximum. Thankfully, these things don't happen too often. They're awful, but they do happen. And then the policy question for this committee is, are we comfortable with these numbers when it does happen? Or should the numbers be closer to what the actual value of the loss is? There's been testimony before that this is a bad bill for taxpayers. That is not a good use of taxpayer funds. I would disagree with that. I think the average citizen and the average taxpayer, if you ask them, if the state or the county or the city or did something negligent that killed your child or your spouse or horribly injured you, would you expect to receive pennies on the dollar or a percentage of the property damage? Or would you expect the state or the county to step in and pay something closer to what the full value of your damages are? I would think that with the state or the county being responsible, the taxpayer would say, well, I expect the full value, not pennies on the dollar. I wouldn't expect a limit. So I think it's a perfectly appropriate use of taxpayer money to protect taxpayers if something horrible happens to them. On a personal note, again, just for what it's worth, I believe deeply in this stuff, that we should be held accountable for our actions, and that if we hurt someone or injure someone, we should be responsible for that loss and to not have it limited. So in my personal life, I carry a $250,000, $500,000 policy. It's more expensive than the state minimum, which is only $25,000, but I believe in this stuff. And then I carry $1 million umbrella policy, which costs me $200 per year. It's an expense. I think it's worth it. My kids play sports. I often have multiple children in the car. If I'm negligent somehow and I hurt multiple people, I want that money to be there to pay the medical expenses or take care of them. If kids get hurt at my house playing, I don't know how or why, but I want that money to be there. So that's a personal choice that I make, because I think if some tragedy happens, and hopefully it never does, that money should be there to cover whatever those damages are. And I would just hope that cities and counties and the state would be the same way. But it's been 45 years since these numbers went into the books. Everything everywhere has become more expensive, and I think it's just time for an update. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Questions? So you mentioned that there was a working group of sorts that got together to talk about. So what was the compromise position that come out of that group?
Mr. Chairman, there was no compromise position. We're in favor of the bill, and I think just about everyone else is opposed to it.
Yeah, disappointing. Yeah. All right, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Wyoming trial lawyers, anybody else?
That was
Mr. Shockey, welcome back. Introduce yourself again, speak.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gary Shockey, appearing partly on behalf of the Wyoming trial lawyers and also personally at the end. And just to remind you, I did the case of the station fire where the fire escaped the trash transfer station here in Casper. There were $3.6 million worth of property losses, uninsured property losses in that case. And the individual property owners had to split up $500,000 for that, so that most people, my client included, got less than 10 cents on the dollar compensation from the negligence at the transfer station. And I just wanted to remind you of those numbers. Personally now, when I pay my taxes, I have an expectation, or a hope at least, that an appropriate amount of my tax money will go to taking care of other citizens who might be injured by governmental negligence. And I know some of the numbers and some of the costs that have been presented about how much more it would cost municipalities or other governmental entities to insure themselves against a higher limit of damages. On a personal level, I would expect that of my government, and I hope that as an arm of that government, I could get some agreement from you folks. So thank you very much.
Questions for Mr. Shockey? Thank you very much. Okay. I think next on our list, Tori Racinas is online. You bring Mr. Racinas in, please.
You bet, Mr. Chairman. He has joined us, and it'll take just one moment.
Good afternoon, committee. Can you hear me?
You're a little faint. If you'd speak into your microphone a little more closely, Mr. Racinas, introduce yourself to the people listening and tell us what you want us to hear.
Thank you, and thank you for letting me appear by Zoom. I had my LGLP board meeting here in Cheyenne this morning. Mr. Chairman, I'm really here to answer any questions that the committee might have. I'm reluctant to, kind of rehash the points that I made in the last two meetings, but I guess just as a focus point for the committee's consideration, I'll remind the committee that the Wyoming Governmental Claims Act is one of the few statutes that actually has a policy statement as to why it exists. And of course, the Governmental Claims Act granted immunity to Wyoming governments, including the state and local governments. And then it took exceptions to those immunities for certain enumerated things. But it talks about the policy statement talks about balancing the respective equities between persons injured by governmental actions and the taxpayers of the state of Wyoming, whose revenues are utilized by government entities on behalf of those taxpayers. And of course, for my membership, again, LGLP has about 530 members, everything from counties, towns, down to little special districts, conservation districts, weed and pest districts, you name it. So we have all sorts of sizes of entity members in the LGLP program. And we talked about, in other meetings, the ability of a lot of my members to generate revenue on their own. So even small increments of increase does have a significant impact on those members. We estimated through our actuarial analysis, which I submitted to you, to the committee at the last meeting, the impact on our annual projected losses, and therefore our annual contributions would be approximately a 19% increase. We talked about other states, and I know it was mentioned the surrounding states have higher burdens, or excuse me, higher limitations on their liability. But it's important to note that nationwide, Wyoming is, not at the very bottom. We're about 10th if you look strictly at the state limitations of liability. I did provide the committee last session with a table that shows nationwide limitations on liability. And one thing that we didn't talk a whole lot about last time was you look at those, some of those states that have higher state limitations of liability than Wyoming, but you look at, they also have lower limitations of liability for local government entities. So there's a recognition that there are different abilities to raise revenue. There's also all sorts of schemes out there to limit liability, even in states with higher limitations of liability, states without any limitations of liability. There are things such as no subrogation against government entities, which in the fire that Mr. Shockey talked about, he talked about uninsured losses and his uninsured clients getting, I think he said 10 cents on the dollar. And the trial lawyers provided a sheet, I think last time, to show the breakdown of those payments that was authorized by the judge. And you'll notice that the insurance companies actually got 3-to-1 return on that $500,000. So, there are ways other than raising local governments' liability to help out these things. And I don't think we've even touched on those really in this interim. But, again, actually saying I'm here for questions and I'm starting to ramble. So I think that the question before this committee really is balancing those equities. Looking back to 1986, when is the last time the legislature changed the limits. And again, we talked about that before. They actually lowered the limits from $500,000 at that time, which was passed in 1979. They lowered it to $250,000 per claimant and $500,000 per occurrence. So we have had the first meeting we had, we talked about there's only a handful of cases, and I think your first speaker acknowledged that there's only a handful of cases that have actually met the caps or gotten close to the caps through all three pools, LGLP, WARM, and SSIP. So I think that's also a factor in, when that committee, you take a look at balancing those equities between injured persons and the taxpayers. So I'll stop there, and I would be happy
Thank you,
to
Mr. Racines.
answer any questions that the committee might have.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Racines? Okay, seeing none. Who do we have from the Wyoming Association of Risk Management? Good afternoon. Make sure you get a green light, then introduce yourself and tell us what you'd like us to hear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon. I'm Mark Stewart. I'm with Davis & Cannon, but I'm here on behalf of the Wyoming Association of Risk Management. I don't have a lot to add to what Mr. Racines did. We're in similar positions. WARM, just as a reminder, it consists of the cities of Cheyenne, Casper, Gillette, and Laramie and Natrona counties. We provided you with some information at the last meeting as to the effect of the proposed raising the limits on the liability cap. And similarly, at the 1 million and 2 million mark, that our actuaries are telling us we would anticipate about a 23% increase in annual premiums that members would be paying into the pool. So I really don't have any much more to add than that. If you raise the liability limit, it's going to cost the entities more money. And exactly how much, we don't know until we get a record of the history of losses once those limits are raised. But we do know that it will go up.
Very good.
Unless anybody has any questions.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.
And then Holly Kennedy with the Conservation Districts.
Mr. Chairman, we do have her online, and she'll be joining us in just a second.
Well, Ms. Kennedy, can you hear us?
Good morning. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
You're a few hours late. It's 3:30, almost 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but introduce yourself and tell us what you'd like us to hear.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Holly Kennedy. I'm the Executive Director for the Wyoming Association of Conservation Districts. I am here today representing all 34 of the conservation districts in Wyoming. Nationwide, conservation districts were formed following the Dust Bowl in the 1930s. Here in Wyoming, our state legislature passed the Enabling Act in March of 1941 to establish conservation districts here within the state. Our Wyoming conservation districts are statutorily authorized to implement soil, water, and natural resource conservation projects and programs, including but not limited to promoting the wise use of Wyoming's natural resources, preserving and enhancing wildlife habitat, protecting the tax base, and promoting the health, safety, and general welfare of the citizens of this state through a responsible conservation ethic. And the reason why I bring all this up is because we are small, but we are mighty. We are tasked with a big task, and we do the best we can to accomplish these things across the state. But with that said, we have districts within the state that have one part-time employee. We have districts across the state, one in particular that reached out to me with great concerns about this. They have a $10,000 a year operational budget. So we are very small, and we're tasked with a lot of big things that we have to accomplish within the state. And so we're small entities of local government. And as a part of that, we are part of the LGLP. And so when hearing about this bill and looking at the impacts it would have to our conservation districts, we were told that this, as written, as proposed, would create a 20% increase in what is already one of our largest operational costs. This looks to significantly impact our ability to get projects on the ground, as most of the work that we do is grant funded, and we have very limited resources for costs that cannot be directly attributed to a grant such as this. We're also hampered in the fact that we're not structured like a small business where these costs can be passed on to consumer. We have to work within our means and stay within our means. And so it's really important to us to be really cognizant of what these costs are. And to be honest, when you're looking at the liability for a group like us in relations to a bill like this, we don't have a huge expenditure of liability. You're looking at something like a vehicle accident or things like that. And so while we certainly understand the committee evaluating these limits, and we understand, you wanting to take a look at these, both today and in prior testimony, we have not seen substantial proof for the need for an increase. We would urge the committee to not increase the current caps, and instead make sure that people are properly insured to prevent these kind of claims from coming in the first place. With that, I would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Committee, any questions? Seeing none. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your morning.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon.
Very good. Is there, let's see, Kelly Krakow?
Good morning, Chairman, committee members. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I cannot see you.
All right, let me see if I can. It is working on it, I think.
There you are. Please introduce yourself and tell us what you'd like us to hear.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Kelly Krakow, I'm the mayor of Albin, but I'm wearing my LGLP local government liability cap today because I'm a board member. And I just had a couple things to add on to the last couple testimonies that was done. One of them was brought up about the private carriers, a minimum of 2550. And the difference between that, the liability is capped, where the private sector, your insurance is a minimum, and there's basically not the sky's the limit, but you can go up to any amount. Well, that's good on paper, but the problem is if you got somebody that's on disability making a minimum paycheck, got a $20,000 trailer, if he injured somebody and's got $1 million, they're not going to get the $1 million. There's a lot of situations why people don't have the assets to pay that. The other thing I'd like to bring up, about 6 or 8 years ago, there was a bill to bump the liability limits on private insureds. And if my memory serves right, there's 2 things that killed that. One, they said if you bump that minimum liability of 2550 to 5000, it's going to raise the premium. That'd put too much hardship on the Wyoming citizens to pay that difference. The other one is they said the instances that would come into play are few and far between. Well, if you really believe in that, I don't see how you can vote for this bill, because the limits we're talking about are being paid by them same taxpayers are paying these premiums to belong to that. And as Tori and Warren has said, the amount of caps that have ever been hit, you could probably count on 1 or 2 hands. So I just wanted to make you aware of a couple of those, and I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Questions for the mayor? Sir, were you part of the conversations about possible compromises in the language in this bill?
I was not. I know our Wyoming Association and Municipality Director was, and I'm sure she's going to be up there. She can fill you in more on that.
Okay, thank you much. Very good. Anyone else in the room wishing to testify, please come forward.
Mr. Chairman, Brian Farmer with Wyoming School Boards Association. With me is Terry Sterling. He is the Director of Financial Programs for Wyoming School Boards Association. And Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to be sure that we weigh in from one piece of the conversation that has not been included thus far, and talk with you a little bit about the School Risk Retention Program. SIRP, School Risk Retention Program, just like all of the other acronyms you have to keep track of in all of this discussion, is a program by school districts for school districts. In fact, it's a joint powers board. Wyoming School Boards Association acts as the plan administrator for the School Risk Retention Program. 31 of the 48 school districts have this coverage. And the other school districts have independent insurance carriers. So school districts have both the SIRP program as well as private insurance for coverage for their liability. And the School Risk Retention Program is a partially self-insured program. So we insure the first $200,000 of liability, and that number was picked very relevant to this statutory cap. So the program brings in enough proceeds that we insure as against the risks for school districts for that first part of our liability. The next 50,000 is under then a reinsurance. And so we go out and we get that reinsurance coverage to help cover our program. Mr. Sterling will tell you a little bit more about that, but obviously what will happen to schools as this is under your consideration is that their cost for insurance is going to go up. The model that was built for the School Risk Retention Program will have to be examined. And then every dollar that we spend on insurance is a dollar that doesn't go to a classroom. So our goal has always been to keep insurance costs low and reasonable for the school district so that they can be directing those dollars to the classrooms. So Mr. Sterling will tell you just a little bit more about that CERT program, and then we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have with regard to any of our 48 school districts.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. Mr. Sterling?
Chairman, thank you. As Brian mentioned, yeah, we are a partially self-funded pool, and just a quick overview of what that means is that if you think about it, we collect the monies from our districts, and then we use those monies that come from the districts to help pay claims. So it's a pool of money that pays not only the claims, but the reinsurance, as Mr. Farmer mentioned. So as we look at potentially increasing this 250 to $1 million, essentially, if you keep in mind that premium or claims drive premium. Everybody thinks that when it comes to underwriting insurance, it's this rocket science, and it takes all kinds of gyrations. But at the end of the day, in a program like ours, essentially you have to have enough premium to cover the claims. So where this potentially could have an adverse effect against our pool is that from a reinsurance standpoint, they look at us right now and they say, gosh, our worst case scenario here is $50,000. Our premium's pretty minimal. If all of a sudden that goes from $50,000 to $700 or whatever that increase was, do the math, our premium's going to go up as well. Secondary to that, we could probably anticipate that instead of a $200,000 self-retention level, they're going to bump that amount up as well. So we have to collect additional funds there from the districts to take care of the self-funded portion of it. And so at the end of the day, it's a financial issue. For the schools, as we mentioned, this is 31 of the schools that we represent. Our plan is written such that we fully take advantage of the immunities that are provided by the Wyoming Governmental Claims Act. And I guess I could go on for an hour, but I know everybody's getting to be kind of a long day. But are there any questions, Mr. Chairman, of the program itself?
Thank you, Mr. Questions? Representative Chestic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question that might be a dumb question. I'm not sure. I haven't done the research. But it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the Wyoming Government Claims Act protects municipalities, school districts, cities, any municipal entity from a claim based on state law. Is there a possibility of federal claims that might be not covered by the Government Claims Act? I'm thinking Section 1983 claims, for example. So first part of the question is, are there potential federal claims not covered by the Government Claims Act? And two, if there are, do you have some kind of stop loss or other excess insurance policy to cover the potentially larger federal claims?
I see two green lights over there. Who wants to?
Mr. Chairman, we'd both like to weigh in on this because I can answer part of that, and then the part with regard to the additional coverage Mr. Sterling would answer. So for school districts, that's absolutely correct. Section 1983 claims are civil right claims, claiming that the district as a government actor has violated the civil rights. You know this as a law professor, not necessarily everybody else is aware of that type of claim. So it goes to federal court, and the limitation does not apply. That is certainly a type of claim that school districts encounter. One of our bigger claims. The other one that we're seeing today are Title IX claims. So Title IX are the sexual harassment or sexual assault, misconduct type of things brought under the federal sort of legislation. Those are the primary two places that we do see federal claims, and there is additional coverage for that.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, yeah, and actually it's the same financial arrangement that we have for even those claims that are under the Governmental Claims Act. The difference being is we don't have that limit. So on these, like Brian mentioned, the Title 19 claims, potentially we have a $2 million policy that would cover for those claims that are not subject to the immunities provided here.
Thank you. Were you part of the conversation on the compromise discussion?
Mr. Chairman, we were not. We've been monitoring the conversation and just wanted to be sure that we got involved today to be sure that you were aware that it's a little bit beyond what you've talked about so far, but have not been a part of that conversation.
Thank you. Appreciate you being here. I know it's been a long day for you guys waiting for your turn too, but appreciate it. Thank you. Anyone else in the room wishing to address statutory monetary amounts?
There's been a handful close to the cap, but that's all that we are aware of. Mr. Chairman, you asked us to get all the parties involved, which we did. When we asked for some examples or data of where their clients were not taken care of, but unfortunately, all we learned about were the egregious what-ifs. We also understood there was no appetite to settle when claims had caps, which concerns me for those parties harmed. Secondly, how do we pay for this? This is more of a philosophical question that you have to resolve. Raising taxpayer dollars to pay for the uninsured public. Is this the public's responsibility? What about insurance? Previous testimony talks about those that choose to have additional insurance as a personal choice. Those caps are in place for a reason to protect taxpayer dollars from an open checkbook. Will this harm those who we're trying to protect? With that, Mr. Chairman, I am sorry to say at this time we are unable to support this proposal. Thank you. I'll stand for questions.
Mr. Raymond?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. Appreciate your attention to this issue. I took it very seriously, your ask of us to go back and take a hard look at this and have a conversation about it. I immediately reached out to the trial lawyers the day of our meeting to say, hey, I'm meeting with my members next week. Do you have anything else that I can offer up to them? I'm still waiting for that answer. I went to my members. I shared with them the parts of this particular legislation and asked for their feedback. And I dug into it a bit more, and I'm going to touch on just a few points. As you've heard on both from LGLP and WARM, my members could expect to see 19 to 23% increases to their premiums. That's for every single member. That's not for the ones that did something wrong. That's for every single member. I also asked them, well, what if we looked at something that wasn't so high? Maybe if it was a 2 or 3% increase. Their response to me is, have you seen the Joint Revenue Committee's meeting agenda in 2 weeks? We're not expecting to see additional revenue. In fact, we're worried about the revenues that we have today and whether we're going to be able to maintain those. So they're kind of looking at me a little bit sideways when I talk to them about the potential for additional budget issues. I talked to them about the number of claims. I told you last time that I'm going to have to go and sell something to them that you've done nothing wrong, as Ashley said, and yet you're going to have increased premiums. How many of these cases have come up? And you heard from the director of LGLP at your last meeting, but I'm going to just reiterate some of those numbers because I think they're really important. There have been 0 cases since 1997 where they've hit the $500,000 cap. There's 1 case where it hit $495,000 for multiple claims. There have been 3 cases between $300,000 and $400,000 for multiple claims, and there have been 2 cases for single claims at the $250,000 cap. That's 11 cases in 27 years. And we're going to now say we want to increase premiums 20 to 23%. My members are really questioning that. I appreciate that this is a 45-year-old law. There are a lot of 45-plus-year-old laws. I think Ashley mentioned to me, what about the liquor taxes and when that was put in place, 1935. I went and looked at the automobile liability statutes to figure out when those were put in place. You might be surprised that those were put in place, those statutory caps for, or not caps, but at least what we have to insure ourselves for, were put in place in 1947, and they've not been changed since that time. So this isn't the only old law that's out there. There are lots of old laws that exist. But when we're talking about old laws, I just told you $500,000, we haven't even hit that. So I'm sitting here going, maybe we haven't even reached where that is too high a level. Maybe we're getting close to that point in another 5-10 years, but we're not there. So with all of that, Mr. Chairman, I guess one other point that I'll just make, and Ms. Harpstreet just hit on this, and that is there are some members, some of our members have procured additional insurance above the cap. And what I would direct you to is if you look a little bit further in Title I, 39-118, and go into B, Romanet I, if those members do that, that is their new limit. So in other words, if one of my members went out and got insurance at $500,000 for single claims or $1 million for multiple claims, that is their new limit. They're now liable to that level because they've procured that insurance. It's right there in state statute. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to take any questions, but my members just aren't there right now.
Question, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you for taking over and also for shepherding this topic. So first of all, I just wanted to thank both of you because you've taken time to meet separately with me on this issue. And I take some of the responsibility for bringing it forward as one of our interim topics, simply because, Mr. Riemann, you pointed out, it is a pretty old law. And once in a while, I think it's important for us to revisit some of these issues. And I think we've all learned quite a bit. I'm disappointed that that there wasn't an ability to kind of come together, but that says to me that maybe this topic isn't ready. I mean, if we can't sit down and say, well, we could probably come part of the way and we could come part of the way and all of this, that didn't happen. And so I just wanted to thank you all for your efforts because I do think that lots of entities have put in quite a bit of time. So thank you.
Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I feel very similar to Senator Landon. I think I threw out at the last meeting that, if we could go halfway, bump it up, not 500,000 to $1 million, 250 to 500, but if there wasn't a good faith effort on the other side, I would be more inclined to just not get behind this bill. But I guess I have a bigger question that's kind of bothers me. We see our insurance rates going up everywhere. And I realize that might have been part of the issue here in Casper. There was probably a lot of folks who were underinsured who didn't have insurance or didn't have enough insurance to help them out. So then when we see those paltry amounts that were paid out by the LGLP, it kind of, it was shocking. So what do you guys think, or do you have any ideas on why are we everyone's getting tanked? I don't care if it's car insurance, house insurance, or government entities. What's causing this? Because we aren't having tornadoes, in Wyoming and floods. So, I mean, for the most part, we do have fires, but any ideas on why?
Insurance industry experts that you are?
I don't know. It's baffling to me.
Yep. Mr. Chairman, and Senator Schuler, I don't have that answer. I'm not in the insurance business, but I think we've all seen it, whether it's on the personal side. I didn't talk about it here, but many of our members have seen premium increases, not only here, but in the other liability insurances that they have to cover. Some of those fairly high. Oh, here we go. Bail me out.
Pinch hitter is at the plate.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, in the industry.
Please state your name again for the record.
I'm sorry. Terry Sterling with the Wyoming School Board Association. We think of insurance as being sort of this silo product that we buy just like here in our community. But the reality of it is it's a global market. And you see like, a State Farm or an Allstate or a Geico and all of that stuff. And within the industry, it's built on layers. And it's kind of similar to the way I was describing our program, where the first layer is our dollars that we spend. And it's the same way within any insurance company. The first layer, they may take, maybe they take $1 million of any loss. And then there's another insurance company that takes, say, $1 million to $10 million. And so you have this very siloed, very layered approach. But all of those, the carriers, once you kind of get beyond maybe the first carriers, that group has narrowed through the years. There's fewer reinsurance carriers, there's fewer excess loss carriers. And so you could have the same carrier that covered, say, the hurricane in Florida, is also covering, take Lloyd's, Lloyd's of London. They're covering losses throughout the world. And so you have all of these global just catastrophes. We had a statistic that was 10 years ago, there was maybe a handful of billion-dollar losses in the United States. And was it a couple of years ago, there's like 20-some of them. Don't quote me on the exact numbers, but just to give you an idea of the number of billion-dollar losses. So as a result of that, even though we're here where we don't have hurricanes and we don't have volcanoes and typhoons or whatever, we still are, I guess, being penalized for that same, for all those losses throughout the rest of the world. So,
Very good. Thank you for the pinch hitting effort there. Okay. Any further questions for the witnesses? Seeing none, thank you for being here. Any further public comment on statutory monetary amounts?
So, Mr. Chairman, Mayor Krako has his hand up again online.
Please bring the mayor back in. I keep calling him Mr. Mayor out of habit, but he's not here on behalf of that capacity today, but.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, committee members, I was just going to answer, kind of help out. I'm in the insurance industry on why the home and auto claims. And the biggest thing is right after COVID, a lot of you know, the cost of everything is just went through the roof. Lumber, shingles, car parts, if you can get them, they're probably double, triple what they was. The other thing, a lot of it on the auto end is your safety features, not that I'm against them, but 15 years ago, a bumper cost you $600. Now it's $6,000 because they got to have backup cameras, your sensors, all that. So between that and then your labor's probably almost doubled. A lot of them factors are why your auto and home, is took a big increase. So I just wanted to throw that out there to you on what some of the causes of that are.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to talk about this bill proposal of their own? Ms. Shaner, I was wondering when you might come forward. Please bring us home.
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Chairman, thank you, and members of the committee. I really appreciate all
Please
the
introduce yourself for the record.
I always seem to leave that part out. Marcia Shaner with the Wyoming Trial Lawyers Association. To begin, I just want to thank you, and I want to thank all of the folks who are sitting behind me who did meet with us. As you know, we've worked on this issue for a lot of years. We felt like it's an important issue, and it may not be an important issue to a huge number of people, but it is an important issue when it's you or when it's someone that you know. What I wanted really to say to you, because Senator Schuler, I do think WTLA has made a good faith effort to try and work with the group of folks that have been before you this afternoon. Perhaps we did not offer exact numbers back and forth, and nor did the folks that we're working with. I want to just let you all know we are very willing to look at different numbers, some of the numbers that we've talked about, 500. 250 to 500, 500 to $1 million. We talked about indexing. We're happy to index. We were asked for settlement information, and we mentioned on the meeting when we were talking with folks that that is difficult information to gather because so many of them are confidential. We tried to explain, which we had lawyers explaining, and so sometimes lawyers aren't always as easy to understand just the settlement process and why some of these caps made it more difficult to settle, or I'm trying to remember some of the other conversations that we had. But we certainly appreciate meeting with everyone. We had very good faith intentions when we did meet with them, and we're happy to look at any other numbers. I realize this is your last meeting, and maybe that's not a feasibility for today. Maybe it will be in the future, but I just felt like you needed to know that we feel like we have made very good faith efforts with this committee and with the group of folks that we met with. We invited them to meet with us, and graciously, they all did. We had a good list. I mean, there are 10 of us Zooming together, and we sort of, the feeling was that we weren't going to agree. And I think that's where we left it. It doesn't mean that we can't agree at some point. But so I thank you. I thank you for all the time. I want to thank the two chairmen. I've appreciated working with you. You have been good leaders of this committee. And to all of the rest of y'all, thank you for all your work this interim. And if you have questions, I got myself all worked up. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Any questions, Ms. Shaner? Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it. Anyone else on this bill draft? Former Representative Laux, I think you have a topic that's tangentially related to governmental claims. This would be the moment. Why don't you come forward and give us some public comment?
Let's welcome back the representative.
Yeah.
No, Mr. Co-Chairman, thank you very much. Bunky Laux, here on my own, Casper, Wyoming resident. And yes, I actually wanted to come and speak on that too. With my message had something to do with something else. But yeah, they are interconnected and has to do with dollar bills and responsibilities of people and decisions that are made that are good or poor. And yes, sir, I sure will. Anyway, yeah. Hey, hi, you guys. Some of you I know, some of you I don't even know at all, and I'd like to meet you, but thank you for serving, because I sure loved the time I did. What I want to talk to you about, and a couple of you I think know, but it has to do with two very tragic events that happened in the last few years in the state of Wyoming. And one of them was here in our county, actually it was in Evansville, and the other was in Sheridan, that was way tragic in the life of a young police officer that was lost and by foolishness, and then the result of that is what I want to talk about. Yes, I better get my glasses on. So it has to do with the results of these two incidents that happened and the aftermath of it. And I don't think any was intended, but it has to do when a fugitive is being pursued by law enforcement and they barricade themselves in a home. And let me paraphrase, I don't have any real knowledge of any of these two events, any depth. I don't know anyone involved. All I know is what I read through the press and was just, my heart just ached with some of what came out with some of these things. It had to do with people barricading a home, okay, and asked by law enforcement to come out with your hands up like they should, make things a lot easier, but they chose not to. And the end result was lives were lost. But the end result that I'm here for is in both these circumstances, the homes that these people barricaded themselves in weren't theirs, and they owned by other people. And I, as a property owner, I'm a homeowner, and also my wife and I have a handful of
rental properties that we have in our community. And in both these instances, people barricaded themselves in the home. And as a result, and I hope it's not a trend in law enforcement style, but as a result, the first one was Evansville. Guy wouldn't come out, they were on a standout, and so somebody made a decision to get a backhoe over there, and they started dismantling the home. And in the Sheridan case, they used fire hoses trying to get the person to come out because it was filling up with water, and then they brought in a large excavator and tore the house to the ground. And the issue is here, both those homes, I mean, nobody's insurance won't pay out on it. Those people lost their homes. And I have a son that does insulation up in Sheridan, and I called him last week when I knew this was coming up. And because the community of Sheridan, some people got together, and he does insulation, and they asked him to donate the insulation for this job. This happened in February, excuse me, it was February of this year. And he took a picture of the home. It's still not done. And the woman that owned the home, she had no connection with this guy. He ran into this home and nobody was there, and she lost a nice home, and she still doesn't have a home. So the issue quickly, is who, I mean, I want you guys to look at this because we all have homes. This could happen to you. Your insurance isn't going to pay out. The government's not paying out. And what do these people do? I mean, they lose everything. I mean, your home is everything you have. It is for me. And so the question I ask you as a committee, who can make a decision or who makes a decision? They call a construction company and have them bring an excavator there. Who has the authority to do that? And I don't know who would, but in what I believe a good direction would be is there needs to be a judge involved and some thought to go through this before we do something like that. But who can make a decision that you do that type of act is what I'm saying, and then have no ramification or responsibility. You had another topic up before that had to do with the responsibility of law enforcement, and we assume that everybody's got their heads on straight, but people in this situation, it looks like people made poor decisions in the heat of the moment is what I'm going to say, because there was a lot of emotion involved, particularly in Sheridan. I mean, there's a lot of people lost one of their best friends, and it was terrible. And so that being said, I hope you all understand what I'm asking. I hope this isn't a trend and we start doing this and we can't drown the rat out or whatever we're trying to do, But, I mean, the bad people make bad decisions, but people that are affected weren't the bad people at all or connected to them in any way, shape, or form. That being said, thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman, and I surely would answer any questions that anybody might have.
Any questions? So I think you bring up a very valid point, because both these properties were third parties. One was a rental and the other was just a complete house chosen by opportunity that this individual hold up on. And so I don't know that we can, well, I suppose we might be able to amend something into this bill that might address this, or an individual member might choose to think about some other legislation that we might bring in January to try and address these types of circumstances, either on the decision-making level, as you described, or at least on the compensation level, when we have an innocent third party who loses their home in these types of situations. So I think you bring a very valid concern.
Yeah, Mr. Kosher, thank you. And that's all I'm trying to do. I mean, I don't know who is aware of this, but my heart just wrenched for this lady in Sheridan. Like I said, I don't have a connection. I don't know anything about it other than what I read in the press. And I've had other people talk to me, after the incident that happened here in our county was in 22. And I mean, it's just innocent people were hurt financially really, really bad. And I just think it needs to be a discussion with this as a committee that would hear that type of thing. I hope we all agree we don't want to see these things happen again like this. And the question is, who has the authority to make a decision to call a construction company and get an excavator in there and do that? I don't think it was a good decision. as well as I don't think there was good decisions made with the fire in Casper either, to be honest with you. So anyway, I appreciate your time very much.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Any other public comment under this heading? Seeing none. Committee, what's your pleasure on LSO 010130?
Move the bill.
Moved by Chestick, second? There, second by? Oh, who is the first? Oh, so motion by Senator Case, second by Representative Chestick. Any amendments on the bill? Mr. Co-Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, just to get started with a little bit of conversation about this, I really appreciate the testimony on all sides, all fronts, difficult stuff. This latest one by the former representative, really appreciate you bringing that forward, Mr. Laux. That, to me, that has to fall underneath something that we're talking about in this bill. Because, I'm looking down in the direction of the longtime representative from Sheridan County, but somebody tore up somebody's house. And the somebody was, it sounds pretty governmental to me, but so I don't know enough about this to know who should be somewhat liable, but that's a great example where I'm leading with this, is that's anywhere from a $300,000 to a $500,000 home, probably. It doesn't take much to get to that level. The multiple claims top limit of this, I guess I understand that we could wait till we blow through the top of that, and then that particular incident, folks just end up getting hurt. And so then we react like that's what legislatures do. We don't proact, we react. And so we come in after the fact and we go, well, gee, we sure didn't mean to have those people hurt that bad, but they were. And the incident that took place here in Casper, the big fire, actually took place at a time when the two co-chairmen represented that part of the world. And off went a fire, and it burned up several homes, 14 of them. And one, by the way, was a former representative in the legislature. Burned up. And yeah, I get it. I mean, it is what it is. We have a limit, and each one got 20 grand or whatever it was. But someday we're going to blow through that. We've got wildfires, we've got other things that go on, and so I'm torn. I'm disappointed that we could not arrive at something in the side meetings. So I'm probably not going to be supportive today, but I'm just commending this to all of us to have this in mind, that we're probably coming up toward the limits here pretty soon. Thanks.
Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see both sides of this as well with the cities, towns, and counties, and I understand not wanting to increase what you're having to pay. I know that there's probably not money coming down the pike right now from the legislature. But that being said, there's been a theme today, unfortunately, from this committee, which I think is we don't have higher standards, and we also don't want to hold ourselves accountable. So I also struggle to say that, we should side with government on this. I think potentially maybe, Mr. Chairman, and this is open for discussion, but what if we reduce the amount of dollars? Can we get to something that's not going to be a 20% increase in taxes, have a smaller increase? I would support creating revenues for cities, towns, and counties. I understand the legislature might not be in support of that, but I think these are two separate issues, and we can't tell the people, well, your government's not going to hold itself accountable when it does wrong to you, because we also aren't willing to pay for anything. Shucks. Anyway, so I'd be curious if this committee would be willing to potentially move this bill forward if we reduced the amounts that we came up with in our bill draft.
Just in response to that, my sense is that's what we had hoped the stakeholder group would bring to us today. And they weren't able to come to any reconciliation of possible alternative proposals. And so they leave us with a bit of a quandary in that respect. Other comments? Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would love it if my liability insurance for my company went up 20 or 25%. Mine have gone up 300% in the last 2 years. 300% in 2 years. The $1 million and $2 million is the very minimum that any of my clients require. Most require, in addition to that $1 million and $2 million, somewhere between a $5 and $10 million umbrella. That umbrella, one gentleman here was speaking about $500, I believe, for a $1 million umbrella. My umbrella is $5,000 per million. So I pay $25,000 for an umbrella that really doesn't do anything. So I think that when we consider the $250,000 cap that's on here now, that's a ridiculously low number. I agree that the costs are going to go up. Cost of everything has gone up, but that doesn't mean that our municipalities and counties, any of our government agencies, shouldn't be adequately covered, because we're not. Thank you.
Representative Chestic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to advocate also for the full amount of the bill right now, the raised to 1 million, 2 million. A couple of points I'd like to make. First of all, yeah, I think a 23% increase is a bargain to get double the coverage. I think that's right off the top. It looks like a good deal. I also wonder if 23% is even high, because we've had some testimony today that there aren't any claims hitting that limit. So insurance premiums are driven by claims, and it's experience driven. And if the experience is that there's no claims above that, why would the premiums go up as much as 23%? I'm not sure that I trust that it's going to go up that much. I also want to point out that I think at least some of the municipalities have said that they're already buying policies in excess of this, up to $2 million to cover the federal claims. So there's an experience there. So I still wonder if that 23% is an overestimate of how much it's going to cost. But the main point I want to make is that the Government Claims Act, as Mr. Racinas pointed out, when it was enacted, it said the purpose of this act is to balance the rights of the taxpayers versus the rights of the individual claimants. And they set that balance back then at $250 and $500. That balance has gone out of whack because of inflation. It's now out of balance because of inflation. So to put it back in balance, just to keep up with inflation, I think Mr. Urbanez pointed out that just using the inflation amounts, the correct amount should be about $1 million, 2 million. So this puts it back in the same balance that was contemplated by the original bill. So I am very much in support of the bill as it is written, without any reductions.
Further discussion. Representative Craigle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so I'm just looking back at the last meeting, LGLP, Mr. Racinas gave us a chart, a breakdown of what all the different amounts would be. And I'm struggling with the 1 million, 2 million right off the bat. We had talked about a phase in. I mean, our counties, our cities are going to take a hit on revenue most likely going forward. And so although I don't disagree with Senator Cooper, I'm just trying to find the right balance in my mind on what, if we're gonna move the bill forward, what's a fair compromise? Even though the parties weren't able to come to a compromise, we can give them one. And so if we were to move the limits to $500,000 and 1 million, that's an 8% increase, which is much different than 20 or 23, which in my mind is more doable. And if that works, a couple years down the road, we can look at it again. So I'm going to propose that amendment, $500,000 and 1 million.
And we have a second by Senator Case or Representative Chestic? Senator Case. Motion by Representative Craigle. And we're clear on what the implications of that are in the bill? Brian?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
And I can walk through, I mean, if you'd like me to, it's.
All right, discussion on the amendment. Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just, want to the folks that are the stakeholders involved here and the people back at home that might be listening, I don't know that I support the amendment, but I support the bill passing. And I'm concerned that if we don't do this, that it won't pass. And so I just want to be transparent about why I'm voting the way I'm voting on this amendment, because I think we should increase these amounts. But as a lawmaker trying to weigh these out and see what we can get done, I'm going to support the amendment.
Further discussion on the amendment? I'd just like to say that, I'm going to vote for this today with this amendment, but I thought that Mr. Racines brought up some ideas that there might be other options out there, like a no subrogation provision, some other things. And so if we move this bill forward to the session, there's probably still opportunity for some fine tuning, some improvement. And so I'm going to vote for the amendment today and see if we can get this bill moved forward. But with that,
Mr. Chairman.
Co-Chairman.
Just to second what you said, I'll support the amendment, and I always, in committee, during the interim, if a bill is a good consideration, I tend to want to send it on to the rest of our colleagues. This is an important policy consideration, and so for that reason, I don't know on a third reading sometime in March if I would support what this ends up being, but I'm okay to keep the bill going and keep working it if it passes the committee, and so we'll see. Thank you.
Question being called. All in favor of the Crago amendment to $500,000 and $1 million, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no? The amendment has passed. Further amendments or discussion on the bill? Question on the bill. Roll call, Clarissa?
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote for 25 LSO 130, governmental claims, maximum liability amounts as amended. Senator Case? Senator Cooper? Senator Furphy?
Aye.
Senator Schuler? Representative Chestick? Representative Crago? Representative Haroldson? Representative Jennings? Representative Nemec? Representative Oakley? Representative Provenza? Representative Rodriguez-Williams?
Aye.
Co-Chairman Landon? Chairman Washut? Mr. Chairman, we have 13 ayes, 1 no.
Finally, a Senate bill. All right, committee, the co-chairman, I sent you an email earlier in the day. Please check your emails before you leave this evening. For all of you who sat through a long day, welcome to the club. And I am very much appreciative of all of you being here and participating in this very important process. And with that, we're going to stand adjourned. We'll be back in tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. And maybe in the morning, be ready to give us a recap on what we did today. Very good. With that,